Okay, good morning, everyone. Seeing we have a quorum, I'll call to order the planning board meeting, regular planning board meeting of July 18th, 2024. Let us stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, first off, who dropped her mic? Richard. First off, our conflict of interest statement. Does any member of the planning board have a conflict of interest or appearance of a conflict of interest with regard to any item on the agenda? If so, please state so at this time. Richard?
I do not.
I do not.
I do not.
I do not.
Thank you. Okay, the first item is amend or approve the agenda. And actually, as you can see, the agenda is kind of one topic today, traffic. So any changes suggested for the agenda?
I would like to get an update on the status of the replacement for the ETJ planning board member. And
We'll do that, I guess, just before adjournment where we normally have administrative issues.
I was fixing to say that the administrative comment tab had gotten left off of this agenda. So if we could add that.
Right. So we'll do that at the end just as a meeting planning thing.
And perhaps discuss, are there alternative ways to fill that position? Right.
Okay.
Thanks.
A motion, anyone want to make a motion? Lisa?
I have another thing if you would,
Yep.
not to add to the agenda, but we have a new audience member that I would like to bring your attention to. This is Miss Kimberly Rigsby. She has joined our team as the Deputy Town Clerk, Administrative Assistant. And after this month, and she gets acclimated a little better, she will be taking Cindy's place.
Oh,
Great. Welcome to Sunset Beach.
welcome.
Yeah, welcome.
Okay, I need a motion to approve the agenda.
I so move.
Any seconds?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next item is any public comments related to agenda items only. Any public like to make comment at this time? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. So first of all, we'd like to welcome Mr. Ben Hughes here, professional engineer from the North Carolina Department of Transportation. Will give us a presentation and then some education on traffic. Any introduction here? Ron, would you like to tee us up, or any comments from your point before we bring Ben to the podium?
As far as introductions,
Okay.
don't really have much more to add as far as who Ben is. Ben, I know, has been with Department of Transportation for a decade or longer, 20 years, 17 years. I have worked with Ben in my previous employment when I was with the city of Wilmington. He knows what he's doing. He's very up on transportation issues with the Department of Transportation, and he represents them well. As far as comments past that, Ron, I know that you guys have been following Brunswick County's traffic impact analysis ordinance somewhat, and my correspondence with the county planning director is that the planning board at their last meeting, which was last week, has tabled or continued their item and referred it to a subcommittee. So they've taken no action at this time. So what we provided you last month following your meeting is still what is being under consideration.
Okay.
Could we get just a brief synopsis of what this issue is in terms of what the planning board is considering at table?
I don't have any more information than that. So what they are considering, though, is,
I mean, I guess you have the Brunswick County latest draft,
It's
right?
changing the threshold.
Right.
It would be increasing the threshold when a traffic impact analysis was required,
Okay.
as well as codifying the timing of when it is going to be submitted. And I'm using the word codify because right now they're operating on a directive from the county commissioners to get the traffic impact analysis in sooner for their reviews. But it's not part of the ordinance, it's directive from the county.
So this
County
is
commissioner.
basically the county commissioner has ordained that this is how this should go.
It's
Now
not-
we're attempting to get it codified into a UDO. Is
I
that
wouldn't say ordained because ordained means it passed an ordinance.
okay?
But it's been a directive from the county commission to require them sooner in the process, and that is how staff is operating.
Okay,
Right.
better said. Thank you.
But I guess the
Yes, sir.
summary in my mind, they're still actively looking at it,
Yes,
but no final
correct.
text.
Yep,
That's
and
good.
it was
No law yet.
correct. It was referred to a subcommittee, and I'm not sure when it will be brought back to the full planning board.
Okay.
Thanks.
Mr. Hughes, you're welcome to take the podium. And Mr. Hughes created a little presentation for us that we have copy of, which I guess I would like him to go through, I guess. And I guess one question for you before is the paper we have what you're going to have on the screen? Right? If you've made any changes to it,
I haven't made any changes.
because I know I've done these before, and sometimes the night before you think, oh, I got to add something.
Mhm.
Just point it out.
No,
So-
this one's been refined. I've
Okay.
done a number of times for cities and counties, so it's I think I've got it dialed in pretty good.
So the floor is yours, and as long as you don't mind if maybe in between slide changes, we have any questions.
Absolutely,
You're-
yeah.
you're
they've got,
open.
there's about 12 slides, so there's time for some questions in between.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for that introduction. Again, my name is Ben Hughes. I'm the district engineer with NCDOT. My district oversees New Hanover and Brunswick counties. We take care of all the driveway access permits that involve traffic impact analysis a lot of times, as well as encroachment permitting, any utilities, anything installed inside the right of way. So with the commercial development, whenever a driveway connects to any NCDOT roadway, it requires a driveway access permit from NCDOT. In certain areas, local government's approval is also necessary to streamline the process and avoid conflicts. Both reviews are conducted simultaneously. For medium to large developments, which can involve significant impact to public transportation infrastructure, a traffic impact analysis is conducted first. This helps any necessary modifications to ensure safe and efficient access point to the development. So when is the TIA traffic impact analysis, when is that typically required? For NCDOT, our threshold is at 3,000 trips per day, which is roughly 300 trips in a peak hour. However, a local government sets a lower threshold, such as requiring a TA for development exceeding just 100 peak hour trips. That lower limit is applied. So Brunswick County, for instance, right now has a threshold of 100 peak hour trips. And so that is what is used to trigger the need for a traffic impact analysis.
So the county's standard supersedes the state standard.
We use the more stringent requirement.
Okay, better said. Thank you.
So, right. So right now, barring any other legislation from any other group, municipally or county, your trigger is 3,000 vehicles per day or 300 peak hours.
Correct.
And when are those peak hour days?
The peak hour in a day. So that's typically, 8 to 9 in the morning and 5 to 6 in the evening, depending on the area.
And any day in the calendar year,
And it's typical,
Any weekday in
typical
the calendar?
weekday
but anywhere in the calendar, because I'll get to that later.
in the area of the study intersections.
Right, because we also distributed some notes, some discussion notes here. And I don't know if I think you got a copy of it, but one of my concerns is our seasonality here. There's a big difference between a Thursday in January and the Saturday around the 4th of July in the number of inhabitants and vehicles in the area. So it was a concern of mine of how and if we can somehow address that. I see there's check boxes on your form that allow for additional days, peak analysis days?
And so a lot of it ties into so the estimated traffic is based off of a trip generation analysis, and so that's done with the uses of the proposed development. And it's the Institute of Traffic Engineers put together a document that kind of roughly estimates what that is, and so you can pull a peak hour from that, and it's typically in the mornings and the evenings, but there are some uses that maybe lend themselves more to like a Saturday peak hour. Depends on what type of development's going in. And so we'll look at that during the scoping of the traffic impact analysis and determine, when is the peak hour greatest for the type of development going in, and also which area, what area are we in? And
I guess if someone's building a 180 unit condo here, obviously you always consider some sort of fixed inhabitants to determine trips, like it's all inhabited.
Correct. It'll be
what
type of development is going in. Single family homes, a condo, and then the associated amount of trips that's generated will be.
But it's always a fixed number based on units, not on.
It's based on units.
So in other words, the 180 units you're assuming that's always
That is the
inhabited,
factor used.
and because in reality here ours varies from, and a type of unit would probably vary from 50% to 90%. But that won't affect the trips. You're always assuming like whatever the assumed number is of inhabitants of that building would be.
Based on the type of, is it a townhome, is it apartments, single family units? It depends on what that use is. A lot of different uses out there, and so we try to find the one that most closely matches what's being proposed.
Right. And see, I'm just concerned that we're viewing this from our seasonality point of view. Of course, also knowing that we expect more traffic and traffic problems in the high season,
right?
But I guess from an engineering standpoint, you got to plan for both.
You do, and a lot of times this winter you're conducting those counts as well, and so we'll try to get them, maybe when school's in session, more in a peak season. So those counts are, kind of what helps steer the traffic impact analysis and measuring the impacts.
Us, schools are almost not. We don't even have one.
Yeah.
I don't think, because unfortunately we have, like you look here, somewhat of a more senior population that have grandkids visiting in the summer,
oriented.
But not kids. Of course, there are some kids that go to school in school, but I'm not saying there's none. But it just has a lower impact than for our traffic then.
Right, and that's where we'll say that when we do scope a traffic impact analysis, we always try to get the local municipality involved. And if you have a designee that you would have for that, but then they'll provide that local knowledge.
Okay.
So the local knowledge could include the fact that, for instance, a condo could be a weekly rental, and that condo is going to exhibit a very different traffic pattern than a condo that's a residential rental. So, for instance, in Sunset Beach, we're getting ready to build, I think, 600 condo rentals in a particular development. Is that mitigating factor going to influence? I hear the differentiation between single-family townhome condo, but there's other factors within those particular categories. Are those going to be addressed? Is that something that comes?
If there's a lot of different uses in that the ITE manual,
right.
And so if one that's more aligned with what that use might be, that would be what's chosen. And there's also an option for collecting local data if there's a similar facility type, in the area that can be counted,
right.
And then you can utilize that. You got to find something to compare it to.
Thank you.
Well,
Thanks.
See what 4. Okay, so 3. Okay. So will the development have to upgrade the public roadways? It really depends. If the impact of the development is minor, little or no changes to the nearby roads are needed. However, if the development significantly affects transportation, upgrades may be required. Roadway improvements are generally necessary if, these are the 3 bullets here, intersections approach delays increase by 25% or more without maintaining the same level of service. Level of service decreases by at least 1 level of service or reaches F. Turning lanes have queues exceeding available space requiring extensions.
I guess, sorry not to break you up all the time.
Segue
This
between
level of
slides.
service I've been mulling and thinking about a lot, and I want to make sure I understand what you have here. I understand the first bullet point. On the second one, the level of service is degrade. Well, number 2 and number 3 here, when you combine them, the way I read this is that you would be okay if the level of service goes from a D to an E.
Well,
Because
that'd
your
be a
last
point
one said
where-
it's F, though your scoping form on your page, don't know what your page number is it at, towards the end, it says level of service D or better is expected for all study intersections after mitigation. So I guess from this, I don't, maybe I need you to explain, when you, obviously you assess the traffic, say if something is already a D, obviously, and it goes to an E, do you make it go back to a D by mitigation?
Yeah.
Or because it hasn't gone yet to an F?
No, what you just said there. If it goes from that one letter to the next, then we start looking at what type of mitigations can bring it back to where it was at.
So if something goes from a C to a D,
Same thing.
you'd make it go back, you would propose or try to engineer mitigation that brings it back to a C.
Exactly.
And if it's already a D to an E, you make it only go back to a D.
The idea is to try to neutralize the impact of the traffic.
And when you say here level of service is F, that means that's completely unacceptable?
We have a lot of intersections that are F. And so,
So what does that mean?
and so that if it's
so
F
they-
and
and
they're
they can't-
impacting it more, we're looking for some type of mitigation regardless. And so in that situation where, your F is really occurring during your worst times of the day. An intersection operates at F, during 5 to 6. The rest of the day really, could be a different level of service. It's really that worst time is what the TIAs analyze. TIAs are very conservative in their nature. They are looking at the worst time of day, and bring it back from there. The other, 22 hours a day, is much less.
Because to me, this level of service, is key to the result. I think it's key to the impact the citizens. I mean, the reason we got started on this is every time there's a development or almost any kind of major development, we have the public comment period.
Sure.
And almost at least every other person, one of their complaints is going to be traffic.
Mhm.
Okay, they just say traffic. But what does that mean? We're trying to determine how to make traffic less of a headache, because I would say most of our, I'm going to look at myself. We leave metropolitan areas generally of a high density, high traffic area and kind of come down here to get away from the traffic. And you see public comments come and say, well, now all the traffic just followed me down here.
Mhm.
So I think the expectation of citizens in this area, now obviously Wilmington's metropolitan and might be a little different. And obviously Raleigh and Charlotte are major metropolitans area. So you kind of expect more that they kind of expect a level of service that's a higher letter because they've already lived through E's and D's, E's and F's. And so I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around, we're doing all this stuff, but we're still going to see more and more traffic and more backup. The level of service is going to continue to drop, and it really never gets mitigated to where it is now. Or
The idea is to try to neutralize as much as possible, but you have enough cumulative development come in, you're going to see more traffic.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. First question is, okay, a level service degrades at least one level. So if it degrades 2, is it adjusted just back one level, or is attempt to adjust it back to its original?
Back to the original.
Back to the original, okay. Second is, I see this term, turning lanes when quay exceeds available storage.
Mhm.
We've had an example here at the intersection of 904 and Old Georgetown Road, where deceleration right-hand lane from Old Georgetown Road was added, but there was no merge lane on the right-hand turn onto 179. So now, yes, there's less waiting time. So is that merge lane after the original deceleration lane considered a storage lane? How is that viewed?
No, what that's speaking to is your left and right turn lanes, the queuing, the stacking of the vehicles, waiting to take a left or take a right. That backup, that distance is a queue.
Okay.
say it's 300 feet. The development's adding maybe an extra 50 feet to that from the software that runs a generation of traffic on that.
Right.
And then the idea is they'll extend to 350 to provide the additional queuing space in that turn lane.
But the actual space for the merge, once that waiting vehicle makes the turn onto the road or to the right.
Into the through lane?
No, not a throughway. This is has a light on it. But
So, well, with a standard intersection, we wouldn't have a merging lane.
Yeah.
So this is speaking to just the right turn stacking.
okay,
the
so
left
are
turn
there
stacking.
statutes? I'll be honest. That intersection now, which we waited a long time for it to be improved over this issue with the deceleration line, in my opinion, now is more dangerous because those people come out of that waiting line and expect to merge into traffic, and there's no
So
place.
it's a right turn.
They're not stopping at the
Well,
red.
No,
yeah,
they're stopped.
everybody stops at the red, of course, because right turn
Okay,
on
it's
red.
not, it's
They're-
not like they're just
assuming legal people.
You hope.
Yeah, but the inclusion is to jump in there and get that turn. There is actually a little bit of
There's a little bit.
there's a little bit of a merging lane.
I'll have to look at that. It's not standard.
But,
Yeah.
my question really is, and I understand the statute about deceleration, but it sounds like there's no companion statute that says, oh, great, now that we got all these people in line, we're going to afford them the enough space so when they make the turn and merge, they have the opportunity to be in a safe lane, view oncoming traffic, and safely enter the road that they're making the turn on. Because there's a right turn on red there. I mean, they may be at a red light, they can turn, there's a yield light.
Mhm.
So I'm just trying to figure out, obviously I get there's a standard for the deceleration lane, but it doesn't sound like there's a partnering standard in terms of the merge lane once those people make the turn. Is that
Right. This is speaking to a traditional intersection that doesn't have you're speaking more like of an on-ramp merge, which
Right.
typically an intersection does not have. Occasionally, it's a higher volume intersection. You may have something like that. And I have to look at the one you're
Right.
speaking
I think
about.
what you're addressing here is all the turners are queued in either a left-hand or right-hand lane, so that the through traffic in the middle can continue without waiting for the turn,
right?
Right.
which is what you're addressing.
That's
here.
exactly it.
The problems he's I think referring to is because one of those queuing lanes is a right-hand turn lane, which was recently added,
Mhm.
and because of being the ability to stop and right-hand turn, it's that safe distance to 3 seconds before that car is coming to get into that, because they're making right-hand turn. They're stopping. I'm sure everyone's stopping,
Mhm.
or they'd get a ticket to make that turn. But I guess the kind of question is how do you, is there any also consideration of left-hands, they got to stop. They're in the queue, they're stopped. They're going to wait for the green or the arrow to turn, right? They can't turn.
Mhm.
But on a red light on a right-hand turn, their drivers are making judgments on the safe gap distance to make the. I think what he said is there some, when you're looking at the turning lane, are you also looking at, or you're always assuming they're just going into the traffic lane?
It sounds like that situation, that's not a merge lane. That's a right on red being made, and that those vehicles stopped should wait for their turn, wait for a gap to get into traffic. And it's not meant to be a merge. It's meant to get right into the through lane. I don't know if there's a little additional pavement in that situation there, but
There is physically some.
okay.
There is
If we have a
physical- I don't
real
remember, it's
merge
not
lane
very-
constructed, it's usually at least 600 feet in length and involves, your arrows pushing you
Right,
in.
this
So
is a short.
this is that's a large radius. I'm
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah, you could
Yeah.
tell. That would not be.
Probably
It's a
for
large
trucks
radius
and
turn,
when they added that
but
in.
actually there is room for a car.
That's not a merge lane.
Right.
Yeah.
From what I'm hearing, that's
Not a merge lane by design.
Right. But how he's using it now.
I'm just trying to dig down because I understand you guys have to create regulations that govern cases, and the standard on deceleration lanes is well known. I'm not hearing that there's an appropriate standard for the merge lane, because the other issue in that intersection is you've got people that have a green light coming in the opposite direction, making a left-hand turn. Now, their expectation is they got the right of way. You got a guy making a right-hand turn who can't see back here. And his expectation is, I got the right of way too. I saw a fender bender there just the other day. You know, nobody got hurt, but it was clear that the person making the right-hand turn, not having enough room to merge and look, just pulled into the lane, and the person making the left-hand turn dinged him in the back.
I'm gonna take a look at that intersection.
Okay,
I
great.
feel like
I don't want to. I'm just trying to see if there's a
Well,
standard.
and also, of course, because of the bridge construction,
Mhm.
that is part of the detour now,
Right.
Yeah, right.
which is why that additional construction was done there recently.
to help with all additional traffic,
Right.
that movement.
So that, I'm sure you don't know, my feeling, that is certainly, we're probably, that in my mind is a D area now. Because it has additional traffic from bridge detour.
You could be
It
right.
might be, I don't know what without looking, I'm sure you don't know what it
Probably
would
a
be
fair
assessed
assessment.
at right now. But the way I view that is a look into our future.
Mhm.
Now, when the bridge reopens in May of nothing, some of that traffic will go the other way out to get to Calabash and 17, like
Sure.
I would. I would never go that way to get to 17. I live on the west end of town. I'd go across the bridge and make a left, and the traffic will drop. But it certainly, in my mind, is our look into our future on what it's going to drop after the bridge is open, and then it's going to get back up that way.
Mhm.
And I think council's looking at some of that stuff.
Yeah,
too.
I mean.
Okay, not to let you proceed and
Okay.
go ahead.
Well,
Thanks,
Ben.
Wait,
Let me
You got
make a quick comment, though, just to address your acceleration lane thing.
Yeah.
So safety-wise, and Ben can probably back me up on this, safety-wise at a light intersection, you want somebody to stop and turn right. If they have an acceleration lane, now they've gone into an acceleration lane, now they're looking back over their shoulder. It's not as safe as having somebody turn, stop at a excuse me, a 90-degree intersection, and they've got an easy turn and look.
That's exactly right.
The acceleration lanes are usually typically on a controlled access freeway
Mhm.
where you've got high speeds and they're trying to merge. You're trying to get somebody from 0 up to 70 miles an
Right.
hour, and
Right.
they need that acceleration.
Well, I guess the issue then is maybe they shouldn't have put that brief
Right.
acceleration lane in at all and force the person to stop. Because right now, if you go to there, those people just sail into that acceleration lane.
Is there a stop bar all the way across?
I'm pretty sure it's painted all.
Pretty sure there is, but
Then that's a right turn with a stop bar,
Yes.
not an
Yeah.
acceleration lane, and
Okay.
that's illegal. What they're doing if they're going right through and using this acceleration.
Well,
lane.
even if it's a complete stop or a stop, you kind of naturally turn into that open area
Mhm.
because that's just it's a kind of a natural radius,
Right.
and then get into the regular lane because there's left turners coming this way, there's traffic coming across. So you have 3 decisions being made: when to make that right, when to make the left, and a non-decision, I guess, the through traffic. So that's that big
Sounds like
it's
a large
intersection to that.
radius, and,
Right,
and those vehicles should be perpendicular when they pull the intersection.
Right.
Right.
Wait for traffic to clear left turners.
And I
'cause they
know-
have a red light at that point.
I don't know how many accidents we've had there. The police would probably know. And
yeah.
I guess I don't know if the procedure is if the police see a problem, would they get a hold of NCDOT and say, "Hey, this is kind of a new intersection, but we seem to be having issues."
Well, that
It-
intersection is in the ETJ.
well, but it's still, our police cover
It's a
that, right?
DOT street, so
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, but
That's
the town
county.
might
I'm gonna
not
go
get-
That's
look at
county.
it.
Town
this
police
weekend
might
anyway.
not get away.
So the
So that
county
might be
would,
one of those intersections where you put up the little plastic barricade thing to keep people from cutting the corner.
Well, it sounds like maybe a large radius is put in for trucks.
Right.
Is what it
Could
was,
be.
and then made the striping. Really have to look at the striping to see where it's at.
All right.
okay,
Well,
thanks.
thanks for clarifying that.
You got it. Okay. So, what are some typical road upgrades for unsignalized intersections? Common improvements include installing new traffic signals, converting to roundabouts, implementing reduced conflict intersections. Used to be called super streets. You see a lot of that up and down US 17. Adding new left and right turn lanes and extending turn lanes. What we were talking about when the queues are exceeded.
Nope.
You guys are kind of in love with roundabouts all of a sudden. Huh?
I do. I think they're a superior intersection.
You do?
Yeah.
Yes.
100%. Accidents go down, they're continuous flow. We don't have the endless maintenance and electric bill from a signal.
Yeah.
Safety improvements are huge. Richard, you have a question?
Well, no, I was just going to say, I forget what TV show they did, but they actually did an experiment where they set up a roundabout and the traffic flow increased on the roundabouts by about 200%. It's,
Yeah, no one's stopping. They're very efficient.
Yeah.
Well,
And the safety improvements are dramatic. You know,
Safety's awesome because everybody has to slow down and
Right.
make a decision with a lot more time involved.
exactly.
Instead of a light where you've got somebody going through at 45 and somebody trying to make that right turn and they're going 0.
Right. If you have an accident in a roundabout, they're usually low speed and they're usually at an angle as well.
yeah.
And so the chances of the severity in those situations of severity of injuries is much lower.
Well, I think too, it takes some, I mean, coming from the Northeast, they're all over the place. We know how to, I think here when they were introduced, people kind of thought, oh, is this a 4-way stop? And it feel like, no, it's a yield, go.
At
So-
Ocean Isle, it's a 4-way.
Yeah, and the one in Ocean Isle has been problematic. I can understand why people not responded well to the roundabout, but the ones that I've traveled around here are great. So, okay.
Let's see. So some common upgrades for signalized intersections. They include adding dedicated left or right turn signals, green arrows and flashing yellow arrows, extending or adding lanes, adjusting signal timing, and coordinating traffic signals with nearby intersections. These improvements help to enhance traffic flow and safety at intersections.
Now, what triggers the installation of a traffic signal?
There are, from the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, it's a federal document, and there's a number of warrants that have to be met for the installation of traffic signals. And there's a lot to it. I'm not an expert in that area, so I won't go much more into it there, but they have to be warranted and based on those specific warrants.
Yeah. Okay.
So, what are some typical improvements made to roads at driveways specifically? Road enhancements at new or existing driveways often include adding turn lanes, installing signals, building roundabouts, converting median crossovers along, let's say, US 1774 to reduce conflict intersections.
Okay. I have another question. In a lot of intersections that intersect with 904 or 179, you'll have an intersection where rather than it being cross, they'll be they won't be parallel. Why does that occur? And I mean, what does NCDOT do to, because to me, that's far
That's a
less
good
safe.
question. So to answer that, so if possible, we try to get them to align. Ideally, we try to get them to align or have them offset in the correct direction. So if you're on a 3-lane road with a center turn lane, we like to get them separated enough so your left turns aren't conflicting with each other. A lot of times, though, we run into constraints such as the amount of available frontage of a development. And so at that point, you're trying to find the best location for the driveway in the limited frontage. And if you have a situation where it's just poor and offset, that's probably what happened. There was an existing driveway, and then there was a development coming in, and they only had so much frontage.
Well, I know, for instance, the entrance into the sanctuary and the entrance to the post office. I mean, the sanctuary was built, they had all that property, and they'll let the lanes are offset. And so is that something that we, the planning board, or the town, should be pointing out and saying, no, when you do this development plan, that egress needs to be here? Or is that something?
That's a good comment. It's something we'll be looking at with the driveway access permit as well.
Okay.
But at the planning board level, that's a good point to identify as well.
All right.
We should be looking at that too.
We don't actually see that though, probably.
No.
We don't
Well,
see the property across the road, driveways, do we?
Typically, the existing driveways are supposed to be shown on the subdivision.
Not adjacent properties, I don't think we require it.
Yeah,
Maybe that's something we need to discuss.
Because
Plus-
you're talking about, because I
It'd be
was
good
here
to
when
put
we
it
did
in
the
there.
sanctuary, I don't believe, I mean, I know the post office,
Right.
But I don't believe the plat requires them to show across the road
Yeah.
adjacent property driveway accesses.
It'd be good for it to show that, and our permitting process requires it
Yeah, because you have that information.
because it's
Right.
key information, like
Right.
Richard touched on.
Well, I don't know if that's something we need to look at for either part of this or is part of the preliminary plat is, I don't know what you want to call it, across the road, adjacent property, other possible conflicting driveways that'd be showing on their plat, or is that not legal?
What we can do, let me look at Appendix A. As you guys know, I'm not as familiar with it as maybe I
Right.
should be. Only working here, a month and a half now. So let me look at it and provide some guidance on that. But I think too, showing, agree with Ben, is a good idea, or having it and you're looking at as per your review. But ultimately, if it's a DOT street, DOT's placement where they feel like it's best and safer is going to trump what maybe the planning board thinks, because ultimately they're going to be responsible for issuing that driveway permit, not the town.
Correct, but we'll have the same concerns y'all have.
Right, okay.
All right, so we're gonna get a recommendation in terms of,
I'm
the
gonna-
other issue too is quite often the developers come and, the preliminary plat that we're looking at is a rough drawing based on a lot of engineering work hasn't been done. So, when can we require that, no, this is where the driveway is gonna go?
If it's a DOT street, ultimately DOT decides.
Right,
If it's a
But I
town
mean,
street,
when we do a preliminary plat,
well,
when do we get to say, this is where you said the road's gonna be, that's where it's gotta be? Because
Yeah, I don't
we
think-
have that input. We can look at that. A lot of what happened with Logan had to do with how streets intersected into each other. But
I know ultimately if it's a DOT street, ultimately you have the final call. I mean, certainly you can review it and raise concerns and things, but DOT is also reviewing it because they have nothing else. They have to get a driveway permit from the Department of Transportation.
if we require the standard that Ben's suggesting here, that they also agree with, if we require it, then NCDOT's input is going to be, yeah, that's how it should be, and correct.
yeah, I guess first pass, what do we recommend? Do we get to see that on a preliminary plat, I guess, or a
Right.
conditional rezoning? And then, of course, then the whole timing issue we're talking about,
Right.
determine who gets, we're actually, our somewhat discussion for proposal is have them look first
Right.
before we get the preliminary plat. So if their
Yeah.
first look,
But you're talking about a TIA.
no,
He's talking about a driveway permit. They're two different things.
Yeah,
if you have a
one
three-lot-
rolls into the next.
one rolls into, right.
Right.
In some cases, it may only be a driveway.
That's
permit.
right.
But they would act, if to move the timing to as I suggested, they're gonna have a look at it before actually we do. So that if we do that, similar to what Brunswick County is trying to do, is push that to the front before preliminary plat's the first time we see it legally.
Mhm.
That if you guys have looked at it and said, hey, the driveway across the road is off by 10 feet, you need to align it.
Unless you're involved in our scoping meeting for the TIA, then a representative of Sunset Beach would have some
Right.
knowledge and can actually make a comment at that point. It's
Yeah,
something we look at during the scoping of the traffic
Right.
impact analysis because the arrangement and alignment of those driveways is a key point,
Right.
especially when they're needing to count the traffic at those locations as well. And we're trying to get them lined up from the beginning,
Right.
early in the
So-
process. And a lot of times they have very rough conceptual plans at that point, and it's much easier to kind of get them steered in the right direction
Right.
at that
Okay.
point.
It's kind of cart and horse deal, but I would think in most cases, because if they have first look, they would correct that. By the time we get the preliminary plat, I would assume the developer will position their driveway in accordance with what NCDOT want. Now,
We're already having those conversations.
I guess if it's not an NCDOT road, if it's hitting a non-DOT road, which I'm not,
Then it's up to us.
then it's up to us completely on the preliminary plat. So we do need to look at that.
And DOT is a part of the TRC process.
Mhm.
So they are in the mix from the beginning.
Right. Okay.
All right.
Got it?
Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, so the recommendation section of the traffic impact analysis is a condensed overview of the analysis results, pinpointing intersection challenges and proposing enhancements to help mitigate the effects of the proposed development, and facilitate the integration of new driveway connections. It's important to recognize that several limitations may impact the feasibility of implementing the necessary enhancements. These constraints commonly include restricted availability of right-of-way, conflicts with utilities, environmental repercussions, and adherence to general statutes, which restrict the imposition of roadway upgrades on low-volume roads. So, in compliance with General Statute 136.18, the NCDOT is obligated to ensure property owners have reasonable access. NCDOT's role involves regulating the location, design, construction, and maintenance of these connections. So, a question I get a lot is a TIA always necessary? Quick answer to that is it is not. So, with NCDOT's driveway permit process, our local office conducts a review of the driveway connections for smaller developments to assess potential turn lane requirements through a turn lane warrant analysis. Irrespective of the development size, the assessment can be conducted internally without the necessity of a TIA.
Right. So as you were explaining before, they're still doing this thing.
Correct. And
And then you look at it and go, okay, you don't need a TIA, but you still need a driveway permit. So we look at your then only your
focused on the
scope of
driveway.
look
Yep.
is only around the driveway access.
That's right.
Right. But if this indicates it's hit a trigger, either the NC dot trigger or a locally imposed trigger, then that expands the magnifying glass that you're looking at to.
Nearby intersections.
And what does that mean? Nearby intersections.
So those in close
Generally,
proximity.
what does it mean? Okay.
Generally, it's in close proximity to the development that traffic is distributed to. And so a rule of thumb is by the time your traffic is kind of watered down to 10% or less, you don't study that intersection because there won't be enough of an impact to necessitate any sort of modifications at it. And so it can change with every development and where it lies
So
and what
you-
the roadway network is
Yeah,
surrounding
so you're
it.
looking at trips and then looking at the infrastructure around it.
Right. Where are those trips going and where are they turning
Right.
and going to?
So you could be very close in on your analysis depending on the road system,
Mhm.
or if there's some just particular bottleneck, a bridge, for instance, that's the only, say it's an island and you got to go across the bridge, really, you always look at that because there's nowhere else that traffic can go except
Right.
this one spot.
You
So
nailed
you
it.
have to look at it, right?
Right. And so say, for instance, if it's in like, city center, like, downtown Wilmington, that traffic can go a lot of different places. And so it gets essentially
Distributed.
diluted and distributed very quickly. And so you can't look at every single intersection. So you strategically look at which ones are impacted by that development the most. If you're in a rural area of Brunswick County, you only have a few roads in that area. All the traffic is going down one road, making, a left or a right, maybe going to another intersection, making a left or right. So there's only maybe two intersections that are impacted. So it depends on where it's at, rural, urban, and size of development to figure out where it goes. And that's all determined during that scoping process.
Yep.
So I've reached the end of my presentation. You kind of had a lot of questions during it. Do you have any additional ones that you wanted to go over?
Yeah, I guess first of all, do you have a hard stop for leaving?
No, I don't.
Okay.
The is the TIA, is that done by, or is that done by the state, or is it outside vendor?
It's done by a certified
Certified.
professional engineer that's focused in traffic engineering.
Might that professional engineer also, as an independent consultant, be hired by the developer or?
They are hired by the developer.
Okay, so
Always.
always.
They don't do TIA.
No,
They
we're fully in the
review 'em.
review of the TIA.
Okay. So you decide the trigger and then it's handed off to the developer to do the TIA.
Developer's engineer, and that
Correct.
engineer
Right,
is a
right.
professional engineer working under their seal. So they have. They're supposed to create a document that's following all the specifications that are
Right.
outlined.
And you have a list of approved engineers.
have a list of local traffic engineers that we typically deal with. And there's a lot of engineering firms out there, but we have about 5 or 6 in our area that we deal with a lot.
DOT they can't recommend a particular.
Right.
Just like
Correct.
the town couldn't recommend a particular engineer.
But
For
a
the
lot of
property.
times they have a list of approved vendors.
Right.
Because there might be an engineer out there who's doing it, but he's not really qualified to do it. So,
Right. I will say that our congestion management unit in Raleigh, they do have, last I recall, they have a list of maybe pre-qualified engineers.
okay.
That
That's
met
what I
certain,
was thinking,
met certain,
yeah.
certain qualifications, and they've been pre-qualified, I think, for more expedient review up in Raleigh. So there is kind of a list like that.
Okay. Any questions now, or I guess my next plan would be
I got
okay, was to at least get in front of us. At the last meeting was agreed upon that I would write some discussion notes, points like text, share it with Richard, and then distribute it to the group, which I believe it was all done and looks like starting on packet 29. So what that document was my original, and I won't call it even draft language. This is not language that would be a text amendment. I would expect Ron and Wes to distill our thoughts and get it into proper legal language, should we decide to go that way or not. So just want to make sure everybody had that, because I kind of like, after Stuart goes, kind of like go down that a little, get everyone's thoughts, and then kind of decide where we want to do, if anything, next. Stuart?
All right. The site plan that you typically see for scoping, is that like a sketch plan, or?
It is. A lot of times it's mostly just sketch concept level. Sometimes just like a bubble figure, because it's very early in the development process and they don't have a great idea of what the development is going to turn into, so they may just throw some basic placeholders out there. And so you'll see they have the property, that they're developing, and then they'll have kind of a sketch plan of what they're thinking the development's going to be.
Okay. So then those numbers that they've got general numbers on the scoping sheet, and then when they come back to you say, yeah, you're going to have to do a TIA, do they come back with more specific numbers in the TIA, or
Sometimes that does happen.
does it just get refined as they go through the process?
Right. They start off as kind of a best guess what the market's looking like.
'Cause
And
they
then-
don't have an approval at that point. either.
No, they don't. They're just starting the process, and they're kind of weighing things out, like what will work here for this development. And so that whole process for a traffic impact analysis can take 6 to 9 months typically. So things may change throughout that process. If they do, they'll come back to us and say, hey, we had an updated site plan, we have updated uses that are being proposed, and so they'll just kind of get those cleared ahead of time before the TIA is fully submitted.
All right. One thing down here that I'm just kind of freaked out about is that in Raleigh, every time we did a project, we were required to dedicate additional right-of-way on DOT roads. If it was going to be a major thoroughfare, and right now it was a 2-lane road, we were asked to give 10, 15 feet of additional right-of-way, and yet that's not a practice at all here. So I'm just kind of concerned that, like 904, we just approved a big project on 904, but no talk of additional right-of-way. So if they do the TIA and they come back and they say, well, we've got to add turn lanes, we've got to do this, and there's not enough right-of-way, I guess at that point they're having to dedicate additional right-of-way.
Mm-hmm.
But what about future, 20 years from now, and DOT needs to come in and add a lane, there's no right-of-way, now DOT has to pay for it, right?
So you're right. We don't ask them to dedicate right away for projects we don't know that are happening. Say we have a project that is planned in design. We have some idea of what the new right of way is going to be. We'll ask during our process that area is preserved. so that when we do go to right-of-way acquisition, we can come in and purchase that area, and we're not impacting stormwater ponds, buildings, and items like that, knowing that the footprint's widening out. So a lot of times we may not have a planned project. We may just have a standard 60-foot right-of-way corridor, and there's no plans in the works or funded projects.
So, in essence, you're saying you are setting aside, by some technique, property that can be used for additional right-of-way. Is that what I'm hearing?
If there's a project that's funded and moving forward and we know where that right of way is moving out to, we'll bring that to the design engineer's attention, and they'll typically, try to avoid putting anything in that area. And that's, like a stormwater pond, a building, knowing that we're going to come in, in the next few years and purchase that right away.
So that would kind of be left in our terms just as a buffer area.
Right.
It's just nothing but a vegetated buffer. Because
Yes.
there's nothing there other than the vegetated buffer
Hmm.
that they can use in the future.
Right.
And a lot of times through your UDOs, you have setback requirements too, and those are helpful in those situations. Like 211 is a good example. In the future, we're going to be expanding the rest of that road. Probably the same width in right of way that we're at. With the current project that's going on. And so I know Brunswick County is having those conversations, land development's coming in to, at least up front, close to the existing right of way, maybe have that area in, for 50 feet here, preserve that, so that, when we come in and purchase that right of way, we're not impacting their development significantly.
So in the Raleigh area, they would ask us to dedicate, say 10 or 15 feet along a major artery. And then, when the plats are recorded, that land just goes to DOT. And I know there's a general statute that's up in the air about this, because I know technically the local municipalities can't require that dedication. And I think there was a lady in Chapel Hill that fought it and won. Of course, then she went back, she won the court case. She went back to get her project approved, and then it never got approved because the local municipality was so angry that she did that. But, it's kind of a weird area, because if we could get the developer to dedicate 10 feet of right-of-way, then the state's not having to come back and pay for it 20 years later when it's a developed, project, and now the homeowners are going to be angry, and you have to move landscaping or a stormwater pond or something like that. It gets a lot more expensive to buy that 10 feet of right-of-way.
I guess maybe for us to look at is buffering, right? Buffering on edges of developments, major subdivisions and such, are buffering requirements. Do we have to pull, the book is here, won't waste the time doing that. I mean, or can we specify additional buffering along roadways?
When
I
you,
mean, if we allow, if we, 'cause I see us not being able to set aside ROW, but we certainly can have buffering. Matter of fact, we talked about it in the Logan Home one. I know a couple of times the amount of buffering between the road, Seaside, and that apartment, the senior apartment building and stuff, that might have to be moved back because it's too close. Whether we should, another note to self for Ron too here is our buffering requirements, I think, are uniform now around the whole property. Whether we should
Increase it.
well, if it's maybe increase, or at least see, should we have something specified, addition on an increase, or when it's along a roadway?
we can certainly look at that requirement.
Right
Taking-
offhand, I don't know what ours is. I'm thinking
Right,
ours
and
is just uniform. I
That's
think
my
it's 20
understanding.
around the whole
That's my
property,
understanding.
but maybe we would say, yeah, it's 20, except when buffering against either we can say NC dot road or whatever, that it needs to be 30 or 35 or something, which means if it's buffered, then
You got 15 feet to hand back.
you're right, they'd still have to buy it from them, from somebody.
Right.
But at least you're, like you say, not moving a pond, not tearing up sewers, not knocking down somebody's pool.
Or not wiping out the whole buffer.
Right, there'd still be a buffer, some
Right,
buffer left.
Exactly.
So I guess from our standpoint, another homework assignment I get is look at our buffering requirements around large subdivisions in general.
I think we can look at an example of this. When you look at 211 down to South, now they're expanding that road, and that was long overdue. And that's going to happen to 904 eventually. We're putting 1,500 new households on that road. 904 is sooner or later going to have to be expanded. So, I mean, this is something, I don't know how we get ahead of it, but
Yeah, so I see us no way forward on the dedication of ROW, but I think we are well within our rights to adjust the buffering. Jerry?
It's, if I'm not mistaken, I thought Logan Homes built in a 30-foot buffer in their presentation.
It was
I
part of
don't-
the conditions because we
30,
so
discussed
I-
it.
30 foot sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
So all of a sudden,
They did agree to 30 feet.
30 feet, which was one of the selling points.
But I guess I would like to make sure we understand what our minimum is. And if we can consider maybe increasing, if needed, increase the minimum when we're along a NC dot road or whatever the proper, or a roadway in general, that we have at least our minimum that we might go down to on the,
Right.
maybe we say 30, but and really we'd be okay with 20 in most cases, but along the road, we really got to be 35. So that if they grab 15, there's 20 left.
I think let us look into that.
Yeah, let's look in and get a report from you
'Cause
guys.
I don't want to create any unintended consequences either, because in my mind, you may have a property that's maybe not as deep as some of the Logan properties, as an example. If you start requiring a 35-foot buffer for potential future road, how does that impact the development of that site? Ultimately, you can't do anything that's really going to take that property, make it undevelopable, as an example. So we want to let us look into that requirement. You do have, if there's a conditional zoning process, you have that ability to potentially negotiate that with the developer. And I say negotiate because ultimately, as you know, they have to agree to the
Right.
conditions that's placed by the
Right.
town and
Okay.
sign off on those conditions. So there's
No, let's
some
just, like,
avenues, but
let's just look at it and see what the pluses and everything has a good idea or a bad idea part
Right.
to it.
right.
So let's see where we're at, I guess, and see, are we comfortable long-term, short, medium, long-term thinking on it? Maybe
Right.
we're fine where we're at,
right.
but it's just worth a look.
And I believe we mentioned this at the last meeting. DOT has the ability to require some improvements, perhaps the city doesn't. As an example, our statutes, as we review our statutes, talk about improvements along the frontage of the road and within the development itself. So the town, if you're reviewing this and you believe, hey, we really think that the intersection a quarter mile down the road is going to be impacted with development, we need to require a turn lane. If DOT says no, that turn lane is not needed, you can't require that if it's a DOT street. Even if it's a city street, you can't necessarily require it because that is outside of
The development.
the development per se, per the general statutes for municipalities.
All right.
Way to go, Stuart.
I'd just like to stir things up.
Good.
So we talked briefly about traffic counting days and that kind of thing. If a project's coming in January and Ron's got this idea of having them do the count on around July 4th, I don't know that we can barely make them wait 6 months to do a traffic count. Are there traffic counts that are established for major roads?
It's typically, you look at what the development that's coming in, and when their peak hour typically happens, and then you try to match the count will kind of match that area and try to find, and they'll count typically from 7 to 9 and then 4 to 6, and then the software will kind of figure out in the 15-minute increments what's the peak hour of that time period. It could be 7:15 to 8:15, so it'll zero in on that peak time. July 4th, for an example, that wouldn't be a good time to count. It's not representative of what's typically going on, and you probably everything's enough at that point. So you want to try to get what is a typical day. that match his
Well,
development.
that doesn't afford me much comfort.
I know. I mean,
Because
the
that's-
reality of life is, I mean, being a tourist town, sort of. I mean, the differential between January and July, I mean, it's not like this.
Right now, if you're
It's
speaking
like
about
this.
seasonality,
Yes.
there is seasonal adjustment
Okay,
factor.
maybe
So
that's what
if
we're
there's an
getting-
account that's done, say in January, there can be a developed seasonal adjustment factor to get it more in line.
So, but
So
that's
you do apply some season, I guess I don't.
Right, just not July 4th.
all right.
So you try to, so you may not be taking like a, I hate to use, it's kind of a root mean square of the difference, if there's a, sinusoidal difference between minimum traffic time January
Mhm.
to maximum traffic time July.
Right.
You're taking sort of trying to find through seasonality the root mean square of that.
You're trying to find that period, May
From
to
June
May
to-
to
right.
October, something like that, where it is that's your seasonal time of year, and that's probably to be conservative, that's the time you want to hit,
Because in this
and
area,
avoiding the outliers.
But how do we
yeah,
how do we know that's done, I guess?
That'll be discussed during the scoping, during the traffic impact analysis. That'll be something that could be discussed during that time.
now is that something that, because I think it was last Saturday, and in Sunset Beach, all of the rentals, not all, almost all of the rentals, the weekly rentals, the vacation rentals, swap on Saturday.
Mhm.
So now, in some respects, the population on the island is doubled. Because you got people in their homes getting ready to leave, you got people coming to the homes that they're about to rent. I was making a left-hand turn on 904 from 179, and it was backed up all the way from the light on Old Georgetown Road in 904, all the way. I had to turn around and find another way. Now, how do you get that data into the impact study?
But it wouldn't really.
If you count during that time period, you would. If that's a study time period for a peak time that you're analyzing, that could be looked at. But it also depends what the development coming in too is. When's their
Well, who's
peak
gonna-
hour?
I'm sorry, Ben, who's going to do that count?
That's the traffic engineer that's hired. So they'll have those intersections counted, and that data is put into the traffic impact.
Yeah,
So
I
would
guess
it-
as long as I have some either insurances in a procedure or what we write that seasonal adjust, because we are a seasonal divergent area, that somehow the seasonal peaks are being looked at. I'm kind of okay with that. I mean, we all have to know, and our resident citizens got to know that there's going to be more traffic in the heavy busy season.
Oh, I guess
We're just trying to avoid that.
I
In my mind, I don't want design being done for January with
Right.
blinders on,
Sure.
that there's nothing, that their peak season doesn't
Right.
exist. The peak
Yeah.
season is,
And
and
that's
we
back
don't want
to-
our guests to be, it's not just, we don't want our guests so upset from coming here that they refuse to come here because we haven't designed an infrastructure system to handle them. They'll go somewhere else. So from just a purely economic standpoint, we have to be somewhat accommodative.
So you want the traffic.
Yes.
I
And
guess,
the locals, I mean,
happy
we should,
traffic.
we should, the local, we know that it's gonna be more traffic than,
Right.
if you ain't gotta go somewhere, stay off the roads if you
I
can. But, I guess I'm trying to achieve some sort of balance, is that the engineering side is looking at the CNL and knows that, hey, because this is not, Raleigh with a somewhat consistent, you got people going to work, going to school. We have like nice in January, you can go anywhere you want, and then there's July, but so I want to make sure at least that seasonality is
It
part
is.
of the input.
It is, and it's discussed during that traffic
Right.
impact analysis scoping meeting, and we can have a representative from Sunset Beach be a part of that as well. So those concerns are brought up.
Yeah, I unfortunately suffer from 2 years of graduate statistics. And when I hear the term data adjustment, it makes me nervous because I'd much prefer for there to be actual data rather than, and you got professionals doing this, and I'm sure they're very scrupulous in what they do, but it seems to me it might be worth our time and money to do the actual data collection in the times that we know where there's high traffic and provide it and say, here's what actually happens on the Saturday before July 4th and the Saturday after July 4th. And this needs to be addressed in terms of your analysis, absent what may be an arbitrary seasonal adjustment based on data that we have no clue where it comes from. So just throw that out there. Well, that shut everybody up.
All right, another question for you. We just got approved, we didn't approve, but somebody here in town approved a large project. And I'm, just based on experience, that's a 1,500 unit project. Based on experience, that's a 15-year, 20-year project, depending on economic cycles and everything else. But is there a way, have y'all ever talked about having them do updates to the TIA, like every 2 to 5 years they have to do an update? Because if there's new external things that are affecting the roadways outside of that project, but the improvements need to be made in front of that project, it seems like there could be updates done to the TIA that could involve that project over time. See what I'm getting at?
Yeah, for your much larger developments, that does happen a lot.
Okay.
I'll take Brunswick Forest, for instance. It's
Uh-huh.
been around for years and it's still growing. The traffic impact
Right.
analysis that was initially done in, I think, 2001. It's basically irrelevant now. Everything has changed out there. So,
Right.
So that has developed, slowly and in phases. And so as the next phase comes online, we do kind of like mini traffic impact analysis to kind of figure out now what needs to be done based on current conditions out there. And your large developments typically are phased in general. And the traffic impact analysis, a lot of times, will look at strategic phasing of that development. And so, the first phase may be, 250 units. And
Right.
so with 250 units, what needs to take place? Well, usually it's closer roadway improvements, turn lanes at the driveways,
Right.
a nearby intersection, and then maybe, 250 to 500. Now you're looking at some offsite roadway improvements. And so, as development comes on board and it develops, they can absorb those costs as well too. So it gives them time to kind of, get some capital together to pay for the more expensive offsite roadway improvements. So if a development's big enough, it's typically always phased, and the TIA will actually speak to that in the recommendation section.
Okay.
Ben, can I ask a question I think is related to what you've just stated and to your question too, Stuart? So if I'm not mistaken, the TIA, part of the scoping and the review includes what I'm going to call background traffic. So potential
Correct.
increase annually of whatever percent that the DOT feels like is reasonable for
Usually
that
1 to
particular
2%
area.
roughly.
So if it's Sunset Beach, maybe it's 2%, and that's actually calculated within the traffic impact analysis. If it's a 10-year build out, then you look at 2% growth rate for 10 years, each year for 10 years, plus the additional impact. Is that correct?
Precise. Yeah, precisely.
So,
I'm just wondering if, there's a way we could, if they haven't fully developed in 5 years, could we ask them to do an update to the TIA? Because there may be external things going on in the county that have changed massively, but they may affect the intersections that are right there at that development.
My initial thought is I don't see how we can codify that anyway, because we don't ever get another look at it. Remember, we only looking at it at preliminary plat generally, or conditional zoning. We never see it again. So,
Well, we'll still be
I mean,
doing-
I guess all we could do is codify that they have to be responsive to them. Whatever whatever NCD asks of them to do throughout the whole life of the project, they must respond to. I don't know. Top of my head, I don't see how we can codify anything else.
So this actually occurs a lot in Brunswick County. So a lot of very large developments there that grow very slowly. And so when they are phased, Brunswick County is involved in that process throughout those phases. So, those building permits will be tracked when they get to a certain threshold. Then they're in the next phase of their development. So they're still involved. And, if the development's large enough in Sunset Beach, we would do a similar thing.
So maybe your thought, if it's a multi-phase project, generally, we're gonna get a preliminary plat per phase.
Right.
So what we're saying here would happen at each phase.
That's what I'm.
Right, well, it
Wondering.
would. I
Yeah.
think the way we're thinking it, say it's 5 phases, the timing thing, they submit the first phase, they would have to do all this, including the TIA. And when they come for the second phase, they're doing it again.
Or at least, if it.
Oh, we're
falls
gonna look at it
within-
again because we need the final, I think I had language in here about making sure it's always updated before
Right.
I think I had it in there, something, I thought I put language in about making sure that what comes to us is always the final update. Yeah, any changes or alterations to any development plan as a result, might have to expand that as phasing it, that. So if they do the TIA for all 5 phases up front, I think we would still be looking at every time they come with a preliminary plat, it needs to be updated to today, to the date.
Or how did it fall within that phasing
Right.
timeline? Because there's timing attached to that.
There is. I
phase.
wanted to speak to that real quick. A traffic impact analysis will assume a build year. You know, it could be 5 years out, 10 years out. Each phase may be a little different. So when we have a situation where maybe a development has exceeded its build year, we'll a lot of times have a brand new traffic impact analysis done at that time because it's essentially void at that point. But if it's on line with which it's tracking, each phase it's kind of met roughly about the year that's in. We look at it and say, yeah, everything's fine. Here's your next set of roadway improvements, and so that a TIA update won't be really necessary at that point. If there's major changes to the network, like you're speaking about, then maybe there is a reason to update the TIA. So
But this all seems nicely cordial the way you're describing it.
it's
And I just feel
it's
like
very
it's,
different with
it's-
each one.
it's really not that cordial when you're telling somebody like, you need to put like 150 feet of road in here and a traffic light and a circle.
Mhm.
Because
Well, that's why we try to reasonably put these
Right.
improvements out there, and that's why we allow for phasing too. It's if a large development comes in and they have a large list of roadway improvements, that could be millions of dollars, and,
Right.
and to ask them to put that in at the very beginning before they even put a shovel in the ground, a lot of times this doesn't work out. So that's why we allow them to kind of incrementally put these in as development necessitates the need for.
which
the
is kind of why
improvements.
we're trying to pull this and maybe pull this more forward so that to the benefit of the developer, that they know what they're getting into, that as our mayor said, we're not a sleepy little town anymore, that each incremental build is it's a marginal impact becomes greater and greater, that, you throwing up on just 50 houses might have been nothing 10 years ago for what the impact was, but now it could be a major impact just because the system is already getting to the limit.
Tipping point.
Right, yeah. So I'll have to think this through, but I think, the timing thing and making sure it gets updated all. I mean, because you say like, okay, on background, we add 1.5%, 2%. But say you're 5 years into that and you think, you know what? In reality, it was 5%,
Yeah.
right? So now at that point, yeah, you made an assumption, you added some to try to make sure you're covered, but it wasn't. So what happened? You go back and say, well, it's actually, now that you're doing phase 3 of your project, we have much more other background traffic than we thought of. So now, we need a whole additional whatever, something X. We need a signal. We didn't think you need a traffic signal before, but now we need one. I mean, how does that discussion? Seems like that would be a kind of a tough discussion, but maybe it's not.
If a development's large enough and it's over enough years, that exactly is re-looked at that point too. So it's
And they
it's a little
budget the-
different on every single one. It's not a very neat box.
Yeah.
Requires a lot of input from local municipality. A lot of our different units, how does traffic actually, what kind of projects did move forward, new road connections that weren't planned maybe with the original traffic impact analysis that can change traffic completely. So it's always kind of a moving target.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. Could you make just a quick comment on level of service D, and how that got to be, kind of the standard where where you try and get to level of service D?
Yeah, that's it's more kind of the reasonable expectation. So give you an example. What's level of service A? That's a driveway connected to a road, no signal, free flowing traffic, and there's no impact on that roadway at that point. As soon as you put a signal up, then your level of service drops down to C or D. So that puts you, that's more the expectation of just a standard signal installation. And so even for our projects, we'll look out and forecast traffic and the level of service we're trying to hit 30 years out by design is level of service D.
But D is certainly not really free and clear.
No, it's not.
I mean,
It's somewhere in the
I
middle.
didn't distribute. I had other level of service information. Being an anal engineer, started doing math. I mean, a level of service C, that's according to my information, which is not that new, 2000 highway capacity manual. That's 30 cars per mile on a lane. So that's not too bad. That's pretty good. I mean, that's basically 11 car length in between a car, which is wide open. But D, go from C to D, is a 40% increase in traffic. That goes from 30 cars per mile to 42 cars per mile. So now your car lengths in between go down from 11 to 7.5, which is still not too bad for a 45 mile an hour road. But E, which is really concerning to me, is allowing anything to go to E, is another 60% more traffic, 67 cars per mile, or 124% of C. So that's more than double C, and now you're down to only 4.3 car length gaps, and that's well below the 3-second safety gap for a 45 mile an hour. So that's why my earlier question on, allowing any Fs or Es, I wrote some notes here to say that we should stay at C, but I know that's probably wishful thinking. But boy, when you go below D, you are, in my mind, a stressed roadway intersection condition. Now, maybe that you're going to tell me that's really not true. It's only a few minutes a day. Maybe that's true, but
Yeah, 12 o'clock at night, you probably have level service A pretty much
we're everywhere.
Yeah,
Right?
so then the traffic impact analysis, we're really looking at the worst time of the day. So that's should be your worst case situation. And you're speaking more to like link level service. So the traffic impact analysis measures delay in seconds at the intersection. So it's a little different. I'm not sure where that material came from, but this is that it looks at just seconds of delay at an intersection, and that's where that level of service change comes from.
But I guess in my mind, what I'm trying to get to, that in the end for the people, level of service is critical. That's what they feel in the end. So, right? I mean, it's change in level of service is what they feel, and really what they're complaining about when they make their public comments on this, when they say traffic, what they're really meaning is, don't let my level of service either drop at all or drop so that it's inconvenient for me. So that's why I spent a lot of time, and maybe I don't know what I'm doing because I'm a mechanical engineer, not a civil engineer, that this getting to or level of service is critical. We can have all these great numbers up front and stuff, but if you end up with level of service E at the end, and everyone met all the criteria, that is just a negative impact on the community.
Well, back to one of my earlier slides, where I spoke to the intention of the traffic impact analysis to neutralize the development's impact. So if they change the level of service one level, they need to mitigate it back to where it was at, not fix the existing problems that maybe were there before. Does that answer your question?
So if the existing infrastructure, road, intersection, whatever, is at C now, and the impact is D, they will be mitigated back to C, not stay at D because D is
Right.
allowed.
Correct.
Exactly.
That's right.
And if it's at D and they go to E, they just go back to D. They don't have to go back to C.
Right. They're
I guess
they're
why
mitigating
don't
their
you
impact
mitigate them back to C?
because they're
at
only
all
responsible
spots?
for their impact on the traffic. So they're mitigating their impact, not the existing impact. So if it's a D, they come in with their traffic. We're not making them bring it back to a
Right.
B.
So if it's a bad design already,
Well, what I'm saying is they're responsible for
The
what they've
road,
done.
the infrastructure has already got a problem. What you're
Right.
saying is,
We'll
It ain't
back
their
to that
problem.
level of bad
it's
service.
NCDOT's problem to fix at that
Precisely.
point,
Yeah.
right? Because if there's already a bad situation, we're not asking them to fix the bad situation. It's now
We're asking them not
state-
to make it any worse.
now make it any worse than the
Mhm.
state's required them. So what's the state goal? This might be off topic here, for what level of service should be on our roads.
Well, I can speak to that level of service D. And when we forecast traffic and we have a reasonable expectation for a level of service that we're trying to meet in the future, D is the level of service we're looking at.
So
It may be C when we open the new facility, but then you add in all the traffic over years as it grows and development traffic adds on to that it creeps up to that D.
So when it gets down to what level is that the trigger for NCDOT to plan?
It's D.
Well, that gets
D?
into a whole different.
Yeah, you're out of your
Yeah,
range.
that's out of my. That's
We're
more
all-
our
I'm
planning and
politics.
transportation.
I'm off topic.
Well, then you have your comprehensive transportation plans, and then there's a data-driven scoring for projects and getting funding for those. And we got a lot of projects that we've identified, but there's not endless money for all of them. So you
Right.
kind of prioritize which ones are the most important to an area.
But-
Well, Lisa was kind enough to forward, I think, a survey about what the community sees as the improvements. When I looked at it, I was surprised that Widening 904 wasn't on that survey. There were a lot of other things that were good ideas, but that kind of made me scratch my head a little bit. So,
Hopefully, you did the survey and put that in there, right?
yeah, well, there was in the comments, yeah, but
In the comments, yeah.
I mean, the survey was, well, I mean, you could click on the road
Mhm.
where you were asking for survey response, but there was no way to do that on 904. Anyway, all right.
Okay. Anything
Right.
else, Stuart?
Yep, I'm still going.
Okay.
All right.
That's why you
Press
get the,
on, my
that's
friend.
why you
That's
get
some
the
good
big
ones.
money.
I was doing some research, and I don't know much about the trip generation stuff, but I pulled up really nice TIA process and procedures manual from Matthews, North Carolina, which is kind of a small town outside of Charlotte.
Mhm.
And they made a comment in here that trip generation rates for age-targeted and/or age-restricted housing developments will assume single-family or multifamily land use codes when estimating site vehicular trips, not senior adult housing land use code. So, can you speak? Wow, can you speak to that? Because this ties back into vacation rentals and senior housing and that kind of thing. What were they trying to accomplish there?
I think they're trying to steer the traffic engineers to using a more appropriate land use code from the ITE manual. And it sounds like they maybe had a 55 and up, housing developments they're concerned about, and they want to make sure that they use this specific land use code when estimating the traffic.
Because that raises an interesting point. Sunset Beach, in terms of its demographic, is the most elderly community
Hey.
in Brunswick County. Hey, the date is the date. So, and that means that a lot of the people that own single-family homes here are retired. They're not getting up at 8 o'clock in the morning and driving to work. I mean, I look at my own traffic, and I'm probably out on 904 twice a week. But so I guess I'm curious in what you just highlighted. Is that something that's taken into account in terms of
Basically,
traffic?
what you're asking is demographics have anything to do with trip generation?
What you just spoke to actually reduces the impact of traffic
Right.
in the trip generation, because
Right.
your standard single family home produces 10 trips per day,
Right.
24-hour period. There has been some studies that shown some of the homes in Brunswick County just being more retiree population is more in the 6 range, 6 trips per day.
Yeah.
Because it's just the age of the home. There's less traveling going out to and from.
And a multifamily home, what's the average trip?
I think it's 6.
6.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think condos and apartments are more in the 6 trips per day range, and the single family homes is typically 10.
Okay.
So-
And I guess what perhaps this does not recognize is the diminished capacity of an elderly population, that their need for more guided points of intersections in terms, is that something at all that's, I'm thinking of
Think-
my
thinking more like pavement
mother-in-law who's
marking,
92
signage.
and still drives.
Yeah, well, I mean, well, you look at Florida, for instance. They have much, they have wider lane markings and different types of signage, and so that's, I think, more what you're speaking to. there.
Right, okay.
Traffic impact analysis doesn't look at that.
Okay.
That's just more about what's standard installations for pavement marking and signage.
Okay, that's interesting. Thanks.
So an age-restricted development, if it's single family, probably wouldn't have 10. It might have
Probably
Five.
6.
Five or
Yeah,
six.
I'd estimate 6 in my.
So Matthews was trying to make them use 10 for the TIA.
Which is sounds like it's irrepresentative of what's actually occurring. So
Right.
they're forcing them to use, I think, improper data at that point.
Right.
Right.
I would agree with that. And does everyone understand why, like, a senior facility would have fewer traffic, or an apartment complex, townhome would have fewer
Because
traffic?
some of those people shouldn't be driving.
Well, yeah, I've had to explain this several times with my previous employer in layman's terms, but like if you have an apartment, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, usually your household size is smaller than a single family home. So you may have like a single parent with a kid versus two parents with two kids, as an example. So the need, the desire, so two parents go out in the morning, they come home in the evening, then they may go two different ways, take, one kid to basketball practice, one kid to, a dance recital or whatever. So the more people you have in a household home, on average, generates more traffic than, say, if you just have two people or three people living in a home. I use myself as an example. My wife and I are the only two home now, and our trip generation is much less than when our kids were there.
Right.
Now they're out, so they were going and coming, and we were going and coming, and 10. We probably were more 12 trips a day.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Ron. And just keep in mind, it's an average.
Right.
10 is the average. So you may have, there's not all homes are the same. You might have, two people in a household, or you may have, 6 to 10 in a household. And so, but averages it out about 10 trips per day for a single family home. And then, like Ron was saying with, age restricted housing, it's probably just two people, no kids. So you're going to have less trips.
And the reason I want to bring that up, because you have heard it at your meetings. Well, if it's 100 apartments or 100 houses, how can you say that the apartments can generate less traffic?
Right, smaller households.
Okay.
Mhm.
Now, when you use the
That's why I wanna
term
bring that up.
average, do you mean average or median?
Not a statistic.
Statistical guy, yeah.
Statistician. I can't say the word.
How many Z scores do you expect? But okay, Stuart.
All right. One last question. The review times, actual review times that somebody submits a TIA, how long does that review time take, just generally?
The whole process is 40 business days.
40 business days.
Mhm.
Okay.
And there's a general statute that requires that.
Okay.
So at most 40, we average, I think, 33 business days in our division.
Is that from submittal to approval or submittal to comment?
It's from scoping submittal to final approval.
Because I saw Matthews had in here that they had 20 business days for completeness review, and then they had an additional 20 days for mitigation review.
And they're mimicking the state statute
Okay.
is what they're doing. So that's ours that as a whole.
I thought yours was 40, so I thought,
Mhm.
are they just mimicking the state statute?
They are, yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of times, the whole process may take 6 to 9 months because it's on the other side with the traffic engineer. They got a lot of data collection to do. They have to put together the whole report. They have to submit these different steps to us. So it usually ends up being in the development part of things much longer. And so our review, but in general, when it comes to us, our holistic review time is roughly about 33 days.
All right.
I have two quick questions that hopefully won't open up a can of worms. Can you give us an update on the Carolina Bypass 31 extension, or is that outside of your purview?
Nope, I don't have any good updates on that.
Okay, great.
Yeah, our division planning engineer would be a really good resource on that, and I believe she attends the local meetings on for those updates.
All right, great, thanks.
Don't want to give you any bad information.
And second, I'm going to say the three words that usually gets Ron upset. Angel Trace Road. This is a road that could provide significant relief to 904, but
It's not their road.
huh?
It's not anybody's road.
And that's the issue. How is there a process for exploring? I mean, the road's, for all intents and purposes, paved, ready to go. It has a break that happened in a hurricane. It would need to be repaired, but it would be a significant improvement
Mhm.
in terms of adding additional right-of-ways, both to developments that are being built right now, and is it because it runs parallel to 904? It connects 179 to Old Georgetown Road. Is there a process? Is there a means in which we can bring that to the attention of forces that might move the ball a little bit in terms of
I got a better idea for you. The
Oh,
town,
God, yes.
it could be a town road.
what?
It could become a town road.
Well, it's direction. it's
I have
going.
already had a conversation and a feasibility study with DOT for Angel
Yeah.
Trace Road, and we did not score high enough. That road did not score high enough for
And
DOT to consider
All right.
to make it a
Right.
state road.
So there is the other option
we
where
can talk about this offline.
Okay.
'Cause I'd be interested to know what scoring, how that works.
Okay.
and so with it being, if it could be a town road, then it would qualify for Powell bill
Foul
funding.
funds.
It would qualify for what?
Powell
Powell
bill
bills.
funding. It's the state gives a certain amount of money to towns for the amount of miles of roads that they have.
Okay, so it's a mile and a half. How much money would the town get?
Offhand, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Thanks.
But it's a yearly allocation
Right.
too. So-
Yeah.
It changes. Jerry?
We get about $150,000 a year in Powell bill money,
Okay, but that goes for road improvements throughout.
the town. Mhm.
Ben, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
informative
You're welcome.
for me, and thank you for going back to and handle Richard's issue on 904 in Georgetown Road.
I'm going to head out that way.
Yeah, well, you want to do that.
Large
Yeah.
radius.
Yeah, and I share Ron's, Jerry's gratitude. This has been very helpful.
Very helpful.
Learned a lot tonight.
Yeah.
I
Really
appreciate you.
appreciate
Thanks
it.
for all the good questions.
Yeah,
All right.
and we have your number.
Business card or good?
I think it's on the
It's on the
presentation,
presentation.
right?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Ben.
So I guess next, well, I don't know where to, I guess where to go next is, like I said, we did publish these notes. And I guess, I think Ben has a copy of it. The first thing I want to say is, that, again, this is not official text. It's just text for discussion. And if we move forward, we expect some official text to be written. And the other thing is for NC DOT's approval, I don't think our intention is to make busy work for them. I'm sure they have a lot to do already, but certainly as the town grows, thank you, as the town grows, traffic it becomes more and more of a issue, as we know. So I want to make sure we smartly address it, I guess. Again, it's not just to make work for them. So I kind of broke up these notes into, by the letter. Obviously, the 3.25 section, for those who don't remember, was originally the section that we had text in when we redid the UDO. And then that section was deleted at the council level. They didn't think it was what we needed. So if we do write anything, it would probably go back in the 3.25 area as traffic impact study analysis. So I divided it up into what I thought was appropriate. Maybe Stuart can tell me we're somewhat off base. And again, it was just shared between me and Richard because that was the two people we decided at the last meeting that would kind of do this and then bring it forward. So I broke it up into applicability first. What areas, what type of development would this be applicable to? And obviously, major subdivisions, etc., rezoning requests, including conditional zoning. And then one area that I kind of tacked down was non-residential, and I just guessed at a number, non-residential structures that exceed 8,000 square feet in size. And again, the little notes below are just what I was trying to do. Now, looking at Ben's data, 8,000 square feet doesn't generate a lot of traffic, really. What he said is, which I didn't have at the time I wrote this, he says basically 20,000 square feet generates 100 peak hour trips, and which would be 1,000 a day. So that number may be, that 8,000 number may be
Too stringent?
too stringent. Yeah.
May I
So
ask,
that,
may I
yeah.
ask a question?
Yeah.
Because I believe below somewhere too, you have 200 peak hour trips or 2,000 peak hour. I know we haven't gotten there yet, so I'm just in my mind, how do they work together?
Well, yes, all this works together. So kind of get, so
I'll be
what I
I'll
was,
get to it.
what I was trying to do on the trigger was pick one trigger. Now maybe that's, when you look at the Brunswick County triggers, they did pick two triggers, one for residential and one for commercial. Okay. No, they're up to 2,000. Right now they have two triggers. But let me at least want to. So I was trying to get to one trigger, whatever that number is. I'm not wedded. Actually, most of the numbers in this suggestion are, I'm not wedded to at all. It was a starting point. Currently, our trigger is 3,000 trips a day, 300 peak hour trips, because that's NC DOT's trigger. When we wrote 3.25 originally, we reduced that trigger to 1,500 trips a day. And it was not accepted by the council. So on the trigger side, which is like the C item, I was trying to just get the one trigger and not be unreasonable about it, kind of mirroring Brunswick County's 2 or 2,000 trigger. So on this first part, I'm trying to make it applicable to what I consider major traffic impacts, which are major subdivisions, and that 8,000 square foot non-residential may be too low.
We wouldn't look at anything on the board less than 10,000, if I'm
No.
not mistaken.
If it's a not, well, we know if it's a non-residential plat, it would come to us.
And
It's
Okay.
the reason, I mean, it sounds like you're trying to create a threshold to in which traffic impact analyses would be required. That may not be as consistent with, that may
No.
be a little, that may come in sooner than
because I guess in my mind there's two thresholds, two things that need to be done. Is first of all this thing, the scoping document. So, and I think, and if you read my timing thing, I'm basically saying this document has to be provided TRC for all applicable, in the first paragraph, projects. And in my mind, and only if they hit the trigger do they move to a TIA. But in my mind, this document should come with everybody that's in the applicable,
Okay.
because no matter what our trigger, say the trigger stays at 3,000, and we get to the TRC, and the developer sits down, and our TRC committee goes, "Okay, where's your TIA?" Well, we don't need one. We were at 290 trips a peak hour. How do you know? How do you get to the 290 unless you see this? Right? That's not that I believe developers would
And
not be scrupulous, but the only way to determine that you hit or did not hit a trigger is see how they got to the trigger or not got to the
sure,
trigger.
and the reason why I was asking is
Right.
because in my mind, if you have, whether it's 8,000, 20,000, 100,000 square foot is your trigger.
Right.
The trip generation is still based on the use itself. So you could have a 5,000 square foot fast food restaurant with a drive-through
Right.
Right.
that generates a lot more traffic than a 20,000 square foot office building. So that's why
Right.
that's why I'm asking the question, is because if we're going to take what discussion from these notes and end up bringing something forward,
I
wanna
thought
make sure
about
I'm
the drive-through
understanding.
thing also, but I also
We're not
thought we
allowed
had some special provisions for drive-throughs in our code.
But it may trigger a drive-through may trigger a fast food restaurant with a drive-through may trigger a traffic impact analysis based on
I
the peak
thought we
hour.
removed drive-through
Drive-through,
from
because-
applications.
Yeah.
Nobody can do a drive-through.
All
in
right,
our-
well, that's
No,
just me
bank-
trying to use an example.
Right.
A bank can.
Bank can.
Right.
Fast food drive-through.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is up for refinement. Again, what I'm trying to think of the process. The process is, in my mind, that developer, he has to know what he's going to provide the TRC, or I guess you guys would probably, his application, right? What does he have to include with his application? And my section A tells who has to provide stuff. And
Can it,
everyone in this group would need to do the scoping form.
can we be more specific about that applicability
Sure.
applies to that scoping document?
Well, it does say further down. Then it comes to the timing section. Timing B1, the completed NC-DOT traffic impact analysis need screening scoping request form shall be required with all applicable application prior to Sunset Beach TRC meeting. So that's B1 is saying if you're applicable, in other words, you meet this paragraph A, of which the 8,000 is out, or we may need further refinement, you at least all have to do this and submit it to TRC. Then, if this form, then you get to what happens next. If that form says you've met the triggers, then of course you got to do a full TIA before submitting the plat or coming to TRC. So, I mean, again, you got all these in motion things.
Right.
So I'll try to go step by step. If I was submitting an application, what would I need to know to bring? So if I'm in A, I know I got to do this form. And if I complete this form and it says I haven't met the trigger, they're done. They said, okay, it's all signed off. We're below the trigger. I don't need to do a TIA. But we have at least this
Right.
that can tell the public the reason why they don't have a TIA is they're whatever. They're at 100 trips per hour and the trigger is whatever. Okay.
Right.
But if this then indicates they've met the trigger, then not only got to do this, but then they have to do the full TIA. That's what I was trying to do at least.
And that would be front loaded before the TRC meeting.
And everything has to be supplied to the TRC. Or I guess maybe in your world, with the application or whatever, and I made mention somewhere that the whole table in appendix has to be corrected. So that's what, in the timing part, bringing it forward is determine who needs to even consider. If you're building a single family house on a single family lot, they don't have to do it, obviously. That's kind of, or if you're building, what do we call a minor subdivision, not less than 10, right? They're not listed. So minor subdivisions are out completely.
Right.
So it's only major subdivisions, mixed use, I was trying to get to, and obviously
Commercial.
conditional zoning, and then you get to how to describe the non-residential, right? And I just threw out, and Ron brings up this point about drive-through.
The use.
The use has something, and I don't know what to do with that. I was just thinking of, and I didn't have this information from Ben at the time, where he's saying his thing here that it takes a 20 square foot mall, he doesn't say anything about drive-throughs, to get 100 peak hours trips. So obviously at 8,000, that's 50, less than 50, 40 or whatever.
I believe that's probably based on a typical retail.
Yeah, typical retail or something.
Right.
Now,
If that's my
if you're
memory
under,
is
but
correct.
this says if your building sizes are only 6,000, you're out. You don't have to do any of this. You don't even have to do this form for Sunset Beach, right? So I don't know if the number way of going for it, or we have to describe uses. That seems awful complicated.
Well, and that's what I was trying to get at, because if your intent is to, let's get a traffic impact analysis when one is needed, when one is warranted. So
Right.
creating those warrants, is it just the total building size, or are you really looking at the uses that are generating this traffic? And that's why perhaps it's written, the scoping is required when the use generates X trips, peak hour, or overall, whatever. And how do we know that? You get that through
This
the
obviously
same way.
requires more work.
So
I knew it had
that's why I was
something to
asking
do
the
with it,
question.
but I mean, I guess even if we picked 10,000, even if we picked 10,000, I would say, obviously, if you look at Ben's number, in most cases, they wouldn't hit the trigger.
What I've seen
So
is,
they would just have to do this, which to me is reasonable for someone doing a 10,000 non-residential square foot
What I've seen in some site plan applications, subdivision applications, would be similar to what you're I think talking about is trip generation estimates, and they would provide whatever the numbers are peak hour, and then they also the land use classification that they use. The land use class being consistent with the trip generation manual.
So that may have to be it.
That would be on
I was
a
trying
typical
not to be too
application.
hard on the non-residential because I think we need some non-residential.
No.
I was trying not to be, but I didn't want to say just all non-residential.
Mhm.
So I was trying to pick some reasonable point to say, if you're just a little one building thing, commercial thing or whatever, well, this whole thing doesn't apply to you because there's no way you can ever add enough traffic to the system to be sensible to the community. So that's where I was at on that. And then I was thinking of the 2 steps. If you're in the applicable group, you at least got to do the scoping tool so that everyone can see you either did or did not meet the trigger and what you used to figure that. And then if you do meet the triggers, which are separate, then you go to the full TIA analysis, working with what I forgot to ask Ben, and I guess for him being here kind of tells you is they're open to lower triggers. I think there was an email on that, which they weren't to before. So
Oh, yes.
yeah, so they're again, and we're not trying to make busy work for NC DOT. We're trying to get them pulled in up front so that the developer, when they're designing their development, like you said, they start with a sketch almost, and then working through that they more smartly design a development such that the impact on our infrastructure is reduced or mitigated
Right.
or less. That's what I'm trying to get to. That in my mind, I'm a mechanical guy, and our rule always, the first 5% of the design locks up 95% of your performance and cost.
Good rule.
That when you're doing sketches and pieces, that's where you got to get the concept right, and then the details fall in. So in other words, if you've located your driveway in a completely bad spot, then to fix it later becomes harder. So that's what I'm trying to get to, is pull the concept up front and make them do a few hard things to make sure that the design that we get when we get the plat is better, has less impact on the community, or at least the community knows what the impact is going to be.
Well, I mean, the one thing that I was struck by in terms of this discussion when we were reviewing this with Logan was they were adamant that they didn't want this to be a trigger in terms of approval or denial. So I think there's a fair amount of resistance to this fact that Brunswick County is kind of, when I hear the word subcommittee, that usually means we don't want to.
So, but commissioners do, so
Yeah.
they can deal with that. And again, my triggers, we know NC DOT's at 3,000. There seems to be some indication that Brunswick County's going to 2,000 or 200 per hour. We originally had that 150 or 1,500. So that number's up for grabs, but I was trying to come with one trigger. Not there's a trigger for residential, there's another trigger for non-residential. What do you do in mixed use? I was trying to get it so that there's one, you do your scoping form, and if your number is, in my case, I wrote it up as the 2,000 trips per day or 200 per hour was probably my original text, that triggers the full TIA. And I was trying to really get alignment with Brunswick County. I think we should strive to kind of be close to the same. One, it makes it, I think, a little easier on NC DOT. They know what's coming to them. Not that, well, this town is this town is that, county's that. So just for simple is to kind of parallel them or mirror them a little bit. So that's what I was trying to do then. And then my D item, which to me is critical, is this level of service thing. I do believe our residents, and me included, really think you're coming down here to level of service B because you left level of service D probably. But in reality, as things change, we're going from B to C to D, and hopefully never to E and F is what I hear. But And if you notice, I wrote this section as C, and I'll read what I wrote here. A level of service C or better is to be expected at all study roads and intersections after all proposed mitigation is accomplished inside the corporate borders of the town of Sunset Beach or within 2,000 feet of any border of the town of Sunset Beach. I'm sure if I read that to Ben when he was here, there'd be a little cringe on their part because they don't do that. So if you were C now, in a way I make sure I understand what he said, if you're C now, if the impact is D, they'll make you go back to C. But if you're D already, and you don't change that D, you stay at D. If you go from D to E, they'll bring you back to D.
Yeah, and that, because
So,
the problem
I
is,
guess
the
when we go
problem-
through it, the folks are just going to have to know that that's the way it is.
the problem
Right.
is, because we're a small community inside a greater ecosystem, a lot of the deterioration from C to D to E has to do with traffic outside of our borders that we can't control. So it seems to me we ought to be able to at least attempt to create a higher standard within our borders than,
Yeah, but they can't, or they won't. I don't know. I didn't ask them if they won't. I did.
Well, if I read what this says to me is it's a current B or current C. Or your mic? Nah, probably. Sorry. What I don't want us to get in a predicament, I guess, is what I'm saying. And legally, we need to be careful on what we do because I believe we can only require them to mitigate only the impact that their traffic has. So that's what Ben was trying to say is if it's a level D now and it goes to an E, they're going to require them to mitigate their traffic to a D. I don't think the town can establish a threshold of C if it's currently a D and it goes to an E and then requiring it to go to a C. Because legally, by statutes, you can only require them to mitigate the traffic that they meaning the development is creating.
well, I
Yeah.
mean, that makes sense, and I
Yeah,
understand.
so we need
why
to
on a-
write that
on a-
somehow,
On
I
a
guess.
legal basis, that would
But I
be
also
the
don't-
standard.
But then there's the other case. So, yeah, okay.
It-
Yeah,
It's going to be tough to go to C.
yeah, I know.
It's just going to be tough.
But the
Because-
reason was because I'm reading this form, and way in the back there, their checkbox says that they've achieved D or better. Their checkbox doesn't say or no lower than you started up on their form.
Right.
So that's what concerned me is their checkbox says TIA is good as long as you didn't get D or that you got D or better. So that means if you're a B and you got a D, did you stay? You're okay. That's what I'm concerned about. You know.
I can take a look at that document a little bit better, but I would be
What he said was different than
Yeah.
the
Right.
the checkbox on this form where the signature pages says LOSD or better is expected at all study intersections after proposed mitigations, but that's not what he said. It does say that if it's one, somewhere else it's like one drop. So he said one. So I guess I want to make sure. Well, I want to make sure practical practice is not running into what. So I'm okay, I guess, if we have a level B intersection, and the new development makes it go to D, and they say you're going back to B, not you're going back to C,
I believe
or D's okay.
my understanding of state law and legislation and even court cases would be a town and a municipality can require improvements to mitigate the traffic generated by that development, but
But
not
to what? That's just the
well,
key I'm
handle
struggling.
the mitigation would be handle their traffic that's been generated back to the current standard.
Right.
Can
we couldn't
say
require it
it has
more.
to be mitigated back to what it is prior to development.
Correct.
Right.
Not
So that's what we need to say, maybe.
right, but not so.
No matter if it's A, if it happens to be an A intersection but doesn't exist anymore, they got to go back to an A to be approved. Not they can go
Right.
to a C and it's okay. But if it's a C, yeah, it's a C and they go to D. I was just concerned reading this that if it was a C intersection and development made it a D, that NCDOT doesn't say,
But there, yes.
it's good. In my mind, it's
Yeah.
not good.
Yeah,
It's
and
got
I
to go
read-
back to what it was.
And so I read your notes as saying if it's a C or a D now and it goes to an E or an F, then the town would require it to go to a C.
See,
So that's probably not. When I wrote that, I knew it probably wasn't possible. I was just trying to push the
So I
envelope.
just want to make sure. I don't want you guys to do anything.
No,
to
I agree.
jeopardize the
Well,
legalities.
nothing I would even get to the proposal. I certainly would want NCDOT to look at it before we take a vote on it again.
And it may just be that maybe it's to be consistent with the DOTs instead. So that
Well,
theirs
I'm
change,
not
ours
sure
change.
about that because I don't know. What I see here is not consistent with what the presentation says exactly. So,
I can try to get some clarification
So-
from Ben on that.
so that's.
So my suggestion would be to take the most favorable interpretation and play dumb.
Well, yeah, and move it down. But to me, this level of service thing, after all is said and done, all the trips per day and all this stuff is, because in the end, that is what the people feel, is what the level of service ends up being. And it's the change in level of service generally, right? You know, as it gets hotter here longer, as the summer goes on, you actually notice the heat less, right? Because you're getting used to it. But if you have an intersection that was a B, or let's say a C, we probably don't have Bs anymore, was a C, and this new development would drive it down to F, and they only mitigate back to a D from a C, you notice the difference from a C to a D then. So that's right. You notice the difference. You don't notice the act. So to me, this level of service, I don't know if Stuart you disagree, that this level, what you mitigate to and how you do it is critical in what the citizens act. I mean, if you put in I don't care what the size of the development in, but when it's done, you don't sense hardly any change. It don't make any difference. Everybody's done their job.
right.
But so to me, this level, as I got into the level of service thing, even though most other codes don't seem to address it very well,
Right.
it's the end, it's the output, right, of the whole process.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's the citizen's sense of, can I make a left-hand turn out of my development, or am I going to be sitting here all day?
Right. And that's right. So that's that part. And I had some information. And then, of course, paragraph E was just wide open because I pulled some exemption language from the old code. So I guess the question in my mind for everybody is, how would you like to proceed? Would you like to just say, stop, too complicated for us? Would you like to instruct staff to start working on real text amendment to include on 325, or how would you? So I would, Jerry, let's start with you. I'm going opposite. How would you like to proceed from here?
Yes, I would yield to the staff to do that. But I also would like to remind the board that you start putting these rules in where they start to stifle development, retail development, which is probably what this is more. I think the town should take this process, should take it very seriously. But as a developer coming in and knowing that I have to go through all these hurdles, I might not come here. So
I agree.
whatever we decide to do, just make sure it makes sense.
I agree.
And Ron and Richard done a lot of work, and this guy was fantastic. I did learn a
No, I
lot
agree.
today.
Which is why I kind of
So
want to always go, I think, softer on
Yeah.
the non-residential side
Yeah.
because
Um,
we need some non-residential development.
but yes, I would yield to Ron and the staff to really think this thing through and bring it back to us.
Stuart?
I had a couple of questions, comments on here. We didn't really talk about your thing of analysis being on July 4th.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I guess, are we satisfied with their seasonality thing or not?
I think he addressed it.
I think it's addressed. The reason I added something like that, because obviously it's obviously true, but I just noticed on their form, where is this? On the analysis period, they do allow additional analysis period, one of them being some weekend peaks.
Yeah.
So what I was trying to get to, can we specify that peak being around which is our seasonal peak, right? Again, I was trying to base this off of their documents that if they, in my mind, if you put an item on a form with a checkbox, and there's another at the bottom, that you're figuring somebody would do something with it at some point. So
Right.
there's a checkbox for an additional peak period at some time of an open weekend on their own form. So I
Well-
guess he didn't seem to say no on that, I guess. He seemed to, I think that it's part of their, they do some seasonality, but I do agree with Richard, this, and I've just looked at this recently on other data, this, what do you call it, where they put a
Data adjustment.
data adjustment factor in, grossly can change, it can be grossly off reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Well, know,
I mean, you do it because you don't want to spend the money. That's
you
why
don't
do
want to
it.
go count.
Yeah, you don't want to go have somebody go count. And that's why in that situation, is this critical enough of an issue that, hey, let's provide them with the real data. I mean, we can, if it, whatever it costs to actually do that measurement, now you can go to them and say, you don't need to do the data adjustment. Here's the data. Now, whether they will include that or not, I mean, we didn't really get an answer on that. But
I mean, I felt a little better when they just say there was some seasonality adjustment.
right,
I just don't know what it is.
yeah,
right. But back to Jerry's point, timing on this is a big thing from a developer standpoint. If they bring something in October, they go through the scoping and we say, oh, you got to have a TIA. But sorry, you're going to have to wait until July
July to get the
4th
data.
to actually count the traffic and then submit the TIA. So it'll be about 2 years from now.
Right.
right.
That's not fair. So either we do like Richard's saying, is we go ahead and do it, some kind of account, so we have some basis for an adjustment, or we have to.
We rely on the kindness of strangers to do a data adjustment,
Right.
which,
And I don't know.
Yeah, I
I
don't
don't
know.
know either. It just seemed to me that
I mean, in Raleigh, things are exactly the opposite.
right.
So if we had to try and do a count in the summer, DOT would say, no, you're going to have to wait till school's back. And so we might have a 2-month delay waiting for school to get back in session before they could do a traffic count. 2 months wasn't that big
For
a
us,
deal.
it's exactly the opposite.
It's exactly
Exactly
the
the
opposite.
opposite. So I put it in here because in my mind, it's an important consideration, but I'm not sure after his talk how to handle it. I agree that the timing problem is difficult. So either I guess maybe we would have to give them the data or hope that their seasonality adjustment is sufficient, realizing that I think every citizen here knows that traffic is bad in the summer and just live with that. It's just, we really don't want those backups to occur in November.
right.
That come July, it's going to be worse and we just have to deal with that.
Right.
So
Well,
we just got to hope. Now, maybe we can get from Ben additional information on
But I
what,
think-
what
But
their
I think-
seasonality factors are to make us feel better.
But I think we could mention something in there that says that, everything should be adjusted for seasonal traffic
I thought-
from May to September.
I thought about some language saying that they have to do something of peak and a period of a peak inhabitants or something. But it sounded like to me, though, they don't care that the units are unoccupied, which is the now more. In other words, I was trying to get to this question, I mean, if you're building a 180 unit condo, they don't care that in January there's only 60 units occupied and July it's 170 units. They're looking at 180 units,
Oh,
generate so many trips per day,
right.
so maybe it's just
Yeah. The other thing they haven't talked about is that like the house next to me on the island is a 6-bedroom house. Well, 9 months out of the year, there's 0 people there.
Mhm.
But in the summer, those 6 bedrooms are full, and there's 20 occupants in the
Right,
house.
lots of cars.
It went from 0 to 20.
So the question is that even though, like I said, our peak, a big old sine wave, right, goes from this to that, and where
If I
they
may.
size it is kind of in the middle, right? They're in the
Right.
0 voltage, right, from the AC sine wave,
Right.
and some
about that
seasonal
here.
doesn't hit the peak, but gets the root mean square of the peak,
Right.
and that's sufficient. So maybe
When the town requested the speed limit on Main Street to be reduced from 35 to 25, they automatically do a traffic study, and it was done during the summer. And then
Okay.
they equaled they agreed with the town that the population was there during the summer and that the speed limit did need to be reduced.
Do
So
we
do
have
we
that-
I think we have
do
to
we have
trust
that data?
DOT to know what they're going to do on their own roads.
Yeah, but do we have that data?
We don't need the data.
Well, we need the
They
data.
reduced the speed limit, what
Yeah,
we wanted
but-
them to reduce it to.
But I'm
My
saying,
question is, if we,
but they only did the count during the summer, so they didn't know the difference in the count.
Right.
From peak to non-peak. But so I guess where I'm at, right? I don't know. We have to keep it in the back of our mind, but it sounds like their mythology, and we can obviously ask further questions, because it's really based on the units, the number of houses, the number of units. Kind of always assumes a certain amount of residents in there, that we have a period that drops below their assumption, and then we have a period that goes above their assumption. But because their assumption's in the middle, and they know there's a little seasonality to us, that they already apply that it's sufficient. As long as sufficient as long as their calculation is sufficient to cover most of reality, I'm okay with it. I was just trying to make sure we think about it.
Miss England said exactly what I was going to say. Was I think at some point you have this trust,
Right.
trust DOT that they know what they're doing. They've been doing this a long, long time, and they work across the region here, this division, this district, but they also have resources statewide. So they see the seasonality,
Right.
whether it's the mountains, whether it's the Piedmont, whether it's the coast. They're aware of all that, and they do build those factors in. Ben said certainly we can have someone at the seat as needed. Lisa and I can talk about who maybe that appropriate person is, whether it's me or someone else, and that can be expressed in any of those scoping meetings. And I know, just my experience with my previous employer, staff from different cities and counties did participate in those scoping meetings to set the ground straight on what the interest of the town is.
so that'd be an opportunity to insert data that we've collected that would influence the outcome of that meeting.
If the town decides to spend the money to collect that data.
Or just a
Well,
comment.
excuse me, it sounds like we have collected that data for the change from 35 to 25. Is that correct?
DOT collected their own data.
Okay.
So they have the data.
So they have the data, and all we need to do is say, hey, when you did this study for the town for this particular, can we have access to that, or can that be part of scoping meeting? Because that way nobody's got to wait. We don't have to wait a year.
But again, as Ron said, I meant that they're already doing it. What we want them to do
Mhm.
is know that right. I have not sat through one of these, so I don't know how to actually. But it sounds like they will try. It seems like we're at the point of probably trusting them to do the right thing. That they know this because they work in this area. They know this and they do it. So okay.
And I've already been
That's their
involved
road.
with the Logan Homes, the initial TIA that the DOT is looking at now. I've already been involved in that process.
Good.
Yeah, because in that, I asked for a trip generation analysis and they didn't provide it until later. But so,
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm as trusting,
well,
to be
you're
honest.
the forever skeptic, Richard.
No, I'm not. Actually, I'm an incurable optimist. But I think the experience of people that come to this community from other areas that have dealt with these issues historically is that this area is way behind the ball in terms of what it has accomplished. So when you tell me that I want to trust these people in terms of going forward, yes, I do have a slight notion of skepticism that I'd like to, they say, what was Ronald Reagan's quote? Trust but verify.
So I think where we're at now is just deciding: do we want to know if we have to take a vote on it, but it's a sense of the board to instruct staff to somehow at some point, we'll pick a date, I guess, and maybe probably not, I don't know if the next meeting or not, some draft text along our notes and discussion we've had on remaking a 3.25 article or not, or do we want to just say, let's stop at this point, or?
No, I think I would love to. I mean, Ron and I have provided a preliminary draft. I think Jerry's comments about we want to make sure that we don't penalize future commercial development, something that we have to take seriously because, you know, we've already lost an opportunity in the Logan Home conditional rezoning, commercial plat that we, the planning board meeting, hoped that they would maintain, has ended up being 80 individual townhomes. And I think that's a real lost opportunity. So I don't want to see us do things that are going to lose, because right now, unfortunately, we're creating a destination golf resort in a community that has nowhere for them to go to eat. And I think that's going to shoot us in the foot down the road. And so having something like this that would obviously include the sensitivity to future commercial development is something that I would love to see incorporated in the UDO.
Stuart?
I think we need to do something to give some better outlines or better guidance. I will say that I did a bunch of research and I pulled up some documents from the city of Raleigh about their traffic impact analysis. And I used Raleigh just because y'all may not know all this, but Raleigh really doesn't have any. I mean, if they had a 1,500 unit development, they'd be out of their minds. I did a project 10 years ago that was 40 units, and they said that was the biggest subdivision they'd had all year. Raleigh's maxed out. So almost all their stuff is redevelopment. So it's existing intersections, it's existing, you know, small parcels that are redeveloping into more mixed use. And they had some interesting comments in here about on the triggers. They had a couple of comments saying affects a location with a high crash history and also takes place at a highly congested location. So they had some extra little triggers in there that, you know, if there was an intersection, yeah, maybe you're proposing something small, but we've got an intersection that's, you know, already got a problem. Maybe we need to take a look at it and, you know, if there's something they can do to help mitigate, you know, what they're adding to it, I don't know.
Well,
So-
I guess in general, then to everybody, if you have useful information or research, not unuseful stuff, is forward it to Ron.
Yeah.
Ron too.
And I
You can't distribute it to and he can decide then what's appropriate to distribute to the planning board.
yeah. And I'll
So-
send you pulled up City of Raleigh and Matthews, North Carolina has a great, I mean, it's not in there, it's not codified, it's their guidance for a TIA. And they went through a whole series of, you know, I don't know. It was really, really good information. If I'm a developer, I'd pull this up and I'd be like, wow, I know exactly what I have to do. And there's no ifs, ands, and buts. I don't agree with all the language in here, but
So send that to Ron. If Ron just thinks it's useful to either staff or to distribute to us or excerpts of it, you can make that decision then.
Sure, glad to consider any of that.
Right.
So it sounds like the board
Wait.
is
Jerry
directed
gets
us to-
Jerry's scratching his chin there.
No,
So
though I'm not an engineer, nor did I take maybe a couple classes in college, but from a
I don't know. I've
business-
seen your golf cart seems to have a lot of unusual statistics on it.
from a business standpoint, again, whatever we decide as a board, you cannot stifle development for this community. And that's all I ask. Is you can take that forward with you.
So obviously where I'm at, because I spent a lot of time, and I think we should continue to move down the road. So I guess the recommendation of the board, the way I hear the consensus, is to have the staff start obviously doing further read, somehow come up with some at some point. We'll talk about timing next. some text or texts options. I mean, don't have, if you can't make it, you could show us more, and then we can take, if we could do a pick from column A or column B, or I don't know. It could be, this obviously is a lot of work. It's a complicated subject. The more I learn, the more I got into it, the more complicated. At some point, some text for us to consider in real, so we can make the next step, either to continue to revise and then, or come up with text that we are okay with to vote to send to council to review.
Hoping at the end of the day, any recommendation. Sorry, thought I turned it on. I'm hoping that at the end of the day, any recommendation made by this board is based on not language that's not real complex and confusing and hard to understand. So just as someone who's written lots of codes and ordinances and interpreted lots of codes and ordinances and worked in lots of codes and ordinances, the more you can say something in plain English, but still cover the legalese, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, is better than something that's complicated to understand and read and very verbose and those kind of things. So I'll take the conversations that we've had the last couple of months, the information shared by Ben, Stuart, if you want to give the information research you've done, as well as Richard and Ron, the work that you guys done. I'll see if there's a way that I can capture something based on what I've heard and discussion. It probably won't be 100% what everyone, every single person has a little bit different idea of maybe what's ideal or not.
Well, I think the
But-
framework I laid out is not that far off.
No.
So maybe those are the starting bones. I mean, I was trying to be broad, what's applicable, when, what,
Sure.
and then there's the exemption, what not, and then there's open E section. I just had an E there.
Right.
Because other. So maybe if you can hang meat on those sort of bones.
Right. It maybe it's just more of a refinement based on the conversation. Yeah, and
And
narrowing
of course,
it
keep
down.
us out of trouble. We don't want anything that conflicts with
Right.
federal law, state law, county law, whatever. But yeah, are we in agreement on that's the instructions or
Yeah, that
the
sounds like a
request for
plan.
staff? And then it's up to you on timing. Obviously, this is, it's more, again, it's awful complicated. So I don't know what we could have. I'd like to keep it moving, the ball. It's as opposed to just issue it to a subcommittee and hope for the best. So I'd like to, even if we can't have text next meeting, at least have some update or maybe some paragraphs we could look at, because
Sure.
there's a decision to be made. In other words, here's a decision on non-residential. We could write it this way, or we could write it that way. Here's the implications. And then we can give you direction on that. Say,
Sure.
oh, this one's out. That's too restrictive. Let's go this way.
And we can continue.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be the whole thing, but I would like to see additional meat on the bones, or the bones changing. Or luckily, Wes ain't here to be like, oh my God. But I like to at least keep the ball moving, at least have some subsections, if not.
we can have the conversation next
Right.
month. So we can,
'Cause
continue.
I don't know.
I'm
So-
not asking you to continue the item, but what I will say is that we can certainly have the item on the agenda for further discussion and comment. Maybe I'm in a position to provide you something to to look at and decide you'll move to council, or maybe it's just a continuing discussion.
Okay.
I have a question for Lisa.
Yep.
Lisa, if we do all this, is council going to be open to looking at this? Or is this are we spinning our wheels? And
Well, I can't speak for the council, of course, but they did remove this before they adopted the UDO, right?
right?
Yeah, sure do.
So I can't answer your question. I'll be glad to put it in my town administrator report and
Yeah.
just let them know what you all are working on, and just sort of get their consensus for you to continue. And I can do that at the August 5th meeting. In the meantime, we can also be working on the draft language.
Sure. But they can certainly obviously look at the YouTube if they're not watching already to kind of see what we're talking about. So
They normally are watching.
right. So, but yes. Well, yes. If they're going to say none of this is up, tell us now, and we'll move on to something else. But if they're just interested at least to see what our work product turns out to be, then we will continue.
I can do that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liesl.
Okay, there was no other new business. Ron, you're okay, right, going forward? After
Yes.
this?
Yep.
Okay, no other new business on the agenda. So I guess maybe I'll stay. Any other administrative issues before we go to public comment?
I don't have any.
Well, we
new-
were going to
Oh,
discuss the,
ETJ person is just still on hold, or?
I do not have any applications for an ETJ person. And the way the ETJ person is appointed, they're actually appointed by the county commissioners. So what I normally do is alert the county clerk that we have an ETJ member vacancy and ask their help, their assistance with filling that position.
so
And in
now,
the meantime, if you know of anybody who lives in our ETJ area, you could definitely be reaching out. And you just look at the zoning map and it'll show you where the ETJ areas are.
Would it be appropriate or legal for us to, not us, the town to contact addresses in the ETJ with a mailing or anything? In other words, if we send out a letter to all the addresses in ETJ and say, there's an opening on the board, if anyone is interested, obviously there's going to be some money involved for stamps and whatever, but whether that's appropriate to do that.
We could do that. It's just time.
So it's been, I don't know
sensitive,
how long it's
you
been.
know,
It's been,
and
what, about 6
staff
months?
level.
Well, just an idea.
Mhm.
either that or an email.
Well,
We don't
probably
have email addresses.
No.
Okay.
Probably easier just to go over addresses in that district and just send out a form letter, hey, there's an opening on our planning board. We have a wonderful planning board. They're happy to have someone else join, so whatever. So maybe that's just a suggestion for to consider. 'Cause I don't know, when did, it's been about 6 months now, right? I don't remember.
Yeah, she resigned at the February meeting.
Okay, so 4 months on. So maybe if we get to doesn't seem like we're making a lot of progress. So if it gets to I'm just thinking of some out of the box ideas.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Okay.
Yeah, we could look at doing that. I can't promise on a timeline.
Okay. Anything else administratively? We got the next meeting coming up, and whatever's on the agenda you'll provide to us.
Yeah, we don't have any rezonings or subdivisions that I'm aware of that's coming for August, but I am anticipating something coming in for at least your September meeting.
For my view, September would be good because I believe I'm out for the October meeting.
Yeah, I've communicated with
You're
Liz.
out I am out too.
Okay, so sounds like we will not have a quorum for October
For
at this
October.
point. So everybody make sure you.
August.
But
No, I'm out for October.
Okay.
And it appears that
I'm out
Richard's
for
out for
October.
October. So whatever we do, we should try to then get into September if possible.
for August, I mean, you still intend to meet August if we don't have anything other than this traffic?
If we only got traffic, then we'll meet for traffic. It'll be a short meeting.
Traffic, and then I may, and I think I mentioned something to you about the Appendix A on the phone. And so what we're looking at right now is trying to figure out if we're requiring information for single-family homes per Appendix A that's unnecessary.
Yeah, so we can
So
adjust.
we're trying
Should
to,
be pretty quick.
but what I'm doing is trying to compare previous code versus the current code, and determine. And here's some feedback from staff trying to figure out: are we having issues with those single family applications? We're hearing some feedback that there may be some concerns from the
So
development
builders have
community.
come in and said, we're building a single family home under a new UDO.
Requiring too
there
much.
might be, or could be interpreted that they have additional requirements they didn't have before.
Yep.
Because they're kind of falling under minor subdivision, then maybe some. So it looks like assessing those issues, figuring out if they're real or not,
Correct.
and then
And
then you can write us an appendix change or any
or at
text
least
changes.
bring it to you for further. So my goal is hopefully have that potential discussion at your next meeting. Now, a couple real quick things I've noticed is previous code defined a minor site plan as a single family or two family development. The current code also includes non-residential. I think it says with less than 5,000 square foot of impervious surface. So there's potential for commercial use. The previous code had some discretionary language that the UDO administrator may waive certain requirements on a site plan, minor site plan, that was not carried over in UDO. So those are two things that I've noticed real quickly, that perhaps the UDO administrator was using that discretion on not requiring some things previously. So what I'm still trying to do is compare the checklist that we currently have versus the list of things that were required
If something was
previously.
never required, then it should be just not required.
Right. So, so as an example, do we need to see adjacent driveways on a single family lot? I don't know. I think that's required for the minor site plan. So it may be something I come back with and say, if we're going to amend this, let's figure out how we exempt single family homes from these three criteria. If that's all it is, that's kind of what I'm hoping.
We're talking single
result
family
out of
home
this.
on a single lot, single building.
Yes.
Okay. Okay,
right.
good.
Good.
Last item, any public comment? Come to the podium if they have public comment in 3 minutes. State your name and address.
Kowski, 929 T-Ticket, Chatham Glen. Just a couple informational points. The intersection of Old Georgetown and 904 averages about 2 accidents weekly. Okay. As you're coming from Galote, coming down to 904 on Old Georgetown, you have a small hill right before the intersection. People don't see what's going on in front of them. So you have rear-end collisions. You have the turn signals, the flashing turn signals that some people from the north or west or anywhere else in the country don't have those blinking caution turn signals. So they don't know what it means. They think it's just, oh yeah, I can turn. So they turn. There's your accidents. So that's something that I think you guys need to talk to DOT about, correcting those issues or citing those issues. Richard, you were talking about the acceleration lane and de-acceleration lane. You're right. When you make that turn, you're coming down Old Georgetown, and you're going to turn on the seaside, make the right-hand turn. You don't normally see all this traffic that's coming from the west, coming east, or coming south, basically. You don't see that on 904 until it's too late. And that's where your other accidents happen, on those side collisions. The other thing is, how does NCDOT know when a phase is happening in the project development? We have to talk to NCDOT to find out if they're notified, and how are they notified by the developer that we went from phase 1 to phase 2. So now we're adding all these homes and all these traffic trips. We don't know when it happens. I don't think they know when it happens. So those are just a couple points I want to bring up. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well said.
Okay. Barring anything else,
NCDOT is a part of our TRC committee, and so they are included on every preliminary plat or phase that comes through.
is there, I guess we touched this before, because that appears to be in the county sheriff's jurisdiction on the accidents. Is there any way that Chief Clement or someone could reach out to them to find out what's actually been going on at that intersection? To talk to DOT?
That would be more
I'm
of the
sure
fire
they-
department
Would the fire department be more
would,
involved?
because they would respond to the
Yeah.
accidents.
I mean,
So I could get the
obviously
numbers from them.
DOT can't respond to anything or look at anything unless somebody tells them that, hey, nice try. And what we tried to do here is relieve, obviously, with the bridge out. But so this is out of our jurisdiction, obviously. But
Mhm.
I don't know. You would know. Can somebody on our end kind of prod the sheriff or whatever to say we need to take a second look at this? This might not be working as well as we thought. I think that's our best we can do. I mean,
GSATS is looking at that intersection, and the town is involved with a study of that intersection for improvement.
Because the challenge is, and when they started to do it, in that acceleration lane, farther down, there's some significant utility installations. When I looked at it, I said, boy, they're going to have to move that pole. It didn't. So now what
Yeah.
restricts that acceleration lane is,
There's nothing for us to do on this other than it's out in the public, and if the town can make sure the powers to be know, then
okay,
Ron, if-
everybody else be more careful. Yeah, go ahead. I'll give you-
If I can add to that, I'm a former policeman, so I know that the traffic studies, okay, or the traffic crash reports that are done by either the county or by Sunset Beach all go into the database for the state. So the state should be able to access that database. Okay, not necessarily does Sunset Beach Fire respond to all the accidents. If it's a minor rear end collision, somebody backs back up into the intersection and backs into someone, fire doesn't come, but the sheriff does come. But those traffic accident reports, the crash reports, should be in the database for the state, and that's where they can access that.
Okay,
can I ask where you served as a
Chicago,
Chicago? Okay, thanks.
26 years in Chicago.
What precinct? What precinct? I'm from Chicago.
I worked in the 13th district, which was Wood Street.
Yeah, kind of in
Humboldt Park, if you're familiar with
out
it.
of Logan Square. So
Yeah. Oh, Humboldt Park, south of Logan.
great. Thank you. Thanks
Thanks.
for your service. Okay, barring anything else, does anybody like to make a motion? I'm sorry, it was a bit long today. Make a motion for an adjournment.
So moved.
I
Any
second.
second? All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody, for your